Train drivers, what's the creepiest thing you've come across on the tracks? I work in Houston as an engineer, and we usually putter around town between 10 to 20 miles per hour. Slow enough for an undressed smackhead to jump out of a bush by a city park and start flicking the old nub on herself in front of the engine. I guess she just really likes trains. I also had a kid play chicken with my train when I was going about 50 miles per hour, but that was more scary than weird. I haven't hit anyone yet, but everyone says it's only a matter of time. Freight train conductor here. You want to know what's creepy or weird? When people try to get across the tracks last second or play chicken with my 30 million pound train. You're not playing chicken with an inanimate object, you're playing with me and my engineer. When you lose, and that happens far too often, I get to see your exploded carcass flipping at 150 rotations per minute off the track and deal with the overwhelming feeling of guilt. Please don't try to beat a train. I work as a backup janitor when the normal one isn't available. I've seen some very weird things at the places I've cleaned. There's the usual needles and beer cans, not that shocking after a while, but the weirdest thing that I've seen was when I called out to a train yard to clean out some disused engines. These things hadn't been used since the mid-90s, and were going to be sold for scrap as they were too battered to be refurbished. I was warned beforehand that there might be a homeless guy in one of them, but I brushed it off since I'd seen many of those guys at the various places I'd cleaned. They usually just ran off when they saw me coming. So, I picked up my bucket and got in the company truck to go out to the disused part of the yard where the trains were. You know, my routine janitorial duties. As I'm driving out there, I noticed that I left the keys to the trains back at the office. Oh well, I figure. These things are so old that the door might not even be there anymore. So I drive out to the engines and park my truck, get out. Nothing creepy at this point, just some rotting diesel engines. I'd seen much creepier things before. I walked up to the railing and kicked the door with a little force. It didn't even have a lock anymore. Walk in and I immediately notice something very odd. It is in near mint condition in there. Great, I think, one less room to clean. But then I notice something very disturbing. A skeleton perched against the wall. Then I notice that it's wearing a leather jacket and clutching a pill bottle in its bony hands. Yep, not hard work to figure out what happened there. I walk a bit closer and grab the pill bottle from its hand. The prescription date was 10/9/96, over 10 years ago. This guy had been rotting in a train for 10 years, and nobody noticed his absence. I pressed the button on my radio and told the guard to call the cops. There's a dead guy in here, and he's been here for a decade. About 5 minutes later, a cop car pulls up and an off-duty cop steps out and walks up to the train. Turns out this guy's been missing since '97, and nobody cared enough to look for him. He was an elderly man who lost his wife, and apparently just offed himself in a train. He lay there for 11 years and was never disturbed. When they buried him a few days later, I was the only one to come. All of his family were gone or didn't care enough to come to the funeral. Sad and creepy. Yeah, I know this one wasn't strictly on topic, but it is very striking. I have no idea what a cadaver looks like after 11 years of just air exposure, and frankly, I don't want to know. You made me picture one of the many skeletal scenes from the Fallout games, though. Nice that you went to his funeral. Up in the coal mines of Wyoming, they have what rail crews call the Golden Arches. It's just a yellow painted framework that has speakers on it that the empty coal trains pass through. A warning is played on repeat, saying in Spanish and English, "Danger, get out. This car is about to be loaded." Loaded coal car gets dumped at a power plant pit where huge augers break it up. I guess more than a few poor souls have been augured up accidentally after being covered with coal. My engine goes by a few movie shoots. The biggest one was the first Transformers movie, the scene where Bumblebee gets caught. A lot of movies are shot in that area by the First Street Bridge in LA. Pretty sure there's an adult film studio not too far from there. There's a colony of clothing-averse individuals on one run where an old guy would always come out and wave at the trains. Knew we were coming since there were road crossings that we had to whistle for. Got mooned by some guys on a golf course. Not pretty. Marital aids keep turning up on the line. There were 2 just last year. They just sit there until the track maintenance guys move them. I'm a conductor, so I'm the guy that sits directly to the left of the engineer. I haven't been doing it for too long yet, so I probably haven't seen the amount of stuff a qualified engineer has. My first week as a trainee on the job, we came across a dead pony next to the tracks that must have been hit only a few hours earlier. The next morning, going back the other way, we passed by it again, and it looked like what you'd expect to see on a Discovery Channel show. Scavengers had gotten to it that night, and it was maybe half a pony by that point. Nature is pretty rad. Depending on where you're working, becoming an engineer might not take too long, though it's probably different now. Only took me a year and a change before I got into engineer training. But when you got trained, they told you it was just a matter of time before you hit someone. It took less than 3 years for my incident to happen. I'm a railway engineer in the UK. The winter is the worst for people jumping on the tracks, with 2 in the last 2 days on the route I've been on. I've been track inspecting before, and from the cleanup of a bloke the night before, they've missed a few bits, so what appeared to be a bit of skull or kneecap could still be seen. The worst thing is the smell. You become aware of the substance hotspots across the route too, with the number of needles under bridges. I've seen pipes made out of all sorts of stuff. Adult fun-time dolls, vibrating toys, and the worst to this day was half a used flashlight, with the A replaced with an E, of course. My gut wrenches the most when I see pets. Cats and dogs are frequently found. Some morons in certain spots are taping or gluing used needles to our access gates as well. Total sickos. My first time on a train, I was traveling in Germany with my grandfather, and he noticed and pointed out to me that we were riding on the wrong tracks. We were northbound on the southern track. Our curiosity got the better of us when I pointed out that there were some guys in bright yellow vests doing some kind of maintenance. And then we noticed that there was blood and meat all shredded up on the tracks. We were going really slow because of the workers, and we watched intently and tried to figure out what kind of animal it had been. But no hooves or fur were discernible. Then we went quite a distance without seeing many chunks, but the tracks were still bloody. Then, there it was, a blue dress. I work on the signaling for the light rail system in Pittsburgh, USA. We'd do all of our testing late at night after revenue hours. Lots of wildlife around the tracks. As we were moving along at about 50 miles per hour, a white-tailed deer jumps out onto the tracks, and we clobber the poor thing. The engineer doesn't hesitate, gets on the radio and tells Central Control to call Hannibal Lecter, and gives the milepost. I look at him sideways, but he doesn't explain what he's just said. We continue to run into the city, turn around and head back the same way. As we come up the side where we hit the deer, there's a guy in full camouflage on the side of the railroad butchering the carcass with a big pile of steaming deer guts next to the track. Did I mention it was about 15 degrees Fahrenheit and snowing? Engineer gives a toot on the horn and we continue our run. My dad's a railroad guy in a bigger city yard. He's seen so much death, and I mean so much death. Mostly self-deletions, people jumping in front of trains or laying down on the tracks. He says if you don't lay the right way, it can actually take you a few minutes to die because the weight of the car seals off anything broken. So even if you're ripped in half, it takes a few minutes to bleed out. In short, unless you really want to die horribly and slowly, don't lay on the tracks to do it. Jump in front of it. Or, get frickin' help and don't traumatize the people driving the vehicle. No, really, get help. There are trained people who really care a small phone call away, no matter what country you live in. I promise it gets better, just take the first step and seek help. Been a conductor for about 8 years now. The main thing I've noticed about human behavior since I started working on the old railroad is that people seem to view a train as a machine instead of a vehicle being driven by human beings. Because of this, they're willing to do horrible or ridiculous or dangerous things that they probably wouldn't do if they thought another human being was going to be involved. Here's my list of crap that my coworkers and I have seen. First, more teenagers and gay guys doing the deed than you can shake a railroad lantern at. 2, drunks and substance users lost in the middle of nowhere, like we're talking miles from anywhere. 3, a coworker came across a train hopper that had had his legs sheared off when he tried to jump in an intermodal car without a bottom. That guy lived, too. Another coworker found a murder victim whose perp tried to cover up her murder by dumping her body on a remote-controlled locomotive track. 5, my uncle was a conductor on a train that hit a woman who decided to take her dog with her. She lived and the dog didn't. I also hit a man who was self-deleting. I was oblivious to what was going on until my engineer said, "I think that guy's gonna jump in front of us." I could see the guy trying to time his jump. It was pretty disturbing because there was nothing you could do. 7, a coworker came across $250,000 in counterfeit money in a gym bag. 8, my uncle hit a cow once and managed to knock its butthole out. 9, some guys laid a bunch of landscaping stones and tie plates on top of the tracks for about 100 yards in front of their trailer park. We could see them all standing back from the tracks, drinking beers and waiting. It was all fun and games until our 12,000-ton train started crushing all the stones and sending shrapnel everywhere. And 10, finally, a train one of my coworkers was on snagged a chain fence that was being installed and rolled up the guys installing it inside the fencing. They don't think anyone got hurt. It was a pretty rough area though, so they didn't stop to find out. I have to admit that for a second I thought you meant the train was just dragging the fence with the poor bloody guy in it across the countryside without stopping, and thought you were an absolute psychopath. But now I guess you probably just whacked it and caused it to roll up? At least I hope so. Then again, with all of this stuff that you seem to have seen on the job, maybe you were jaded enough to just keep plowing on. Conductor here. One time in the middle of the night, in the middle of winter, 10 degrees and a foot of snow on the ground, my train went into emergency stop. I had to walk the length of the train to see what the problem was. The train was right in the middle of a very small town. As I'm walking by one of the houses on the outskirts of this town, I see a guy standing on the driveway about 50 feet from me wearing a trench coat and a sock hat kind of thing. The first thing that struck me as odd was it was way too cold to be wearing just a trench coat. I shone my lantern on the guy and said, "Hi." Nothing. The guy doesn't even move. I continued walking past him to the end of the train while looking back quite often. I get to the end, turn around and head back. I get back to the house where this guy was standing and he's still there, in the same place, in the same position. I don't even say anything this time. I just speed walk back to the head of the train. The next day I'm taking a train back home during the day. I'm paying special attention to this house as we go by. There's nothing there. The drive isn't shoveled. There's nothing that could have been mistaken for a guy in a trench coat. I've since been by his house dozens of times and I've never seen a car parked there, or a light on, or anything at all. In short, saw a scary guy in a trench coat standing in the middle of the driveway of an abandoned house at 3 in the morning in the middle of winter. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I thought I'd found a Stand By Me situation under a bridge, only younger. Yeah, I was freaked. I was stopped waiting for my signal and I noticed a bundle of clothes and what looked like a tiny body underneath the bridge. My heart was pounding like crazy as I approached. Turns out it was a doll, some used needles and some discarded clothes too. I was relieved. As a previous train driver in Sydney, Australia, there were 2 spots to look for undressed women who'd regularly sunbake in their backyards in summer. I've also run over a lot of stuff like bikes, shopping trolleys, carts, and a lounge. Weirdest thing I've seen was when preparing my train in the front yard, I found a brown paper bag with a huge black marital aid in it, and yeah, I left that there. There's a routine here in Tokyo to deal with people on the rails. The government even charges a fee to the family of the self-deleters, given that they interrupted the traffic. Not an engineer, but I do operate a high rail truck with train wheels on it that zips down the railroad tracks. I was working in the port of Metro Vancouver and had to measure out 2,500 feet from where we were working to do a certain regulatory test. So I jumped in my truck and reset my counter and went on my way. I arrived at my 2,500-foot stop and jumped out to spray paint the railroad tie to mark that spot for the rest of the crew. I then realized I had no spray paint, nothing in the whole truck. I searched for a little flag I could put up, but had none of these either. I ended up searching the ground for something like a stick or garbage that I could just leave there in the middle of the tracks for the time being. Now, down in the part of Vancouver, the tracks basically run parallel to Hastings Street, and for those of you who've actually heard of it, it's basically the world's biggest confined smack problem. This documentary actually did their episode on smack down there. Anyway, you always find crazy stuff along the tracks there. If it's not a body, it's 500 hypodermic needles. So in this giant pile of garbage, I find an old barbecue, complete with a set of barbecue tools like tongs and a brush and stuff. I thought it would be pretty funny if I just set up a barbecue in the middle of the tracks. We were working there, so no chance of a train hitting it. I went to move the barbecue and found, no joke, the biggest, longest, girthiest marital aid I've ever seen in my life, even to this day. It was at least 3 feet long and had to have been almost a foot in circumference. Who is buying that kind of thing? I decided this would be the best thing to mark the location with. I ended up finding a couple of old random shoes in that pile, and armed with my tongs that I found earlier and a pair of gloves, I managed to jam the marital aid, stones first obviously, into one of these shoes and got it to stand upright all by itself. I really wish I was able to have my phone at work. I would have had a good picture for you guys. Anyway, with that spot marked for the next guy, I put my truck into reverse and headed back to the crossing we were working at. I arrived and the foreman at the time was asking how I marked the footage without taking the paint. I told him that he'd eventually find out when he got there. We packed everything up and were waiting for the train on the opposite track to go by us when the train's brakes hammered on and started screeching. Scared the crap out of all of us. Now, when a train goes into emergency stop, everything stops and the traffic controller is on the radio immediately. We were all told to just stay where we were as there'd been a person struck by the train just half a mile from our job site. We took our trucks off the tracks and headed down the parallel road to see what had happened. When we arrived, we found a CP police officer and 3 Port Authority vehicles there, all parked right beside where I'd left my, marker. With the way it had looked, how thick it was, and the fact that the top was red, I guess one of the Port Authority officers thought it was a severed leg and called it in to stop all trains in the area and called the cops as well. The look on my foreman's face was priceless when he looked back at me after looking at the 4 grown men standing around the 3-foot-high marital aid stuffed into a dirty Reebok. We didn't say a word to anybody about it, as I'm sure we'd all be in the crap. I realize now that this is probably not the response you were looking for, and I'm certain you had to be there to really appreciate how ridiculous this was. But you know what? This is all you're getting from me. I hauled half a dead bear off the tracks on my second day working for the company. I've also seen a few bodies of people who self-deleted by train, but they were just laying in the ditch. They didn't ever end up exploding like I thought they would. Hey, I'm an engineer on a Class 1 on the West Coast. 9+ years of seniority, with 7 being as an engineer. I've never seen anything creepy or mysterious though, but I have hit plenty of unfortunate animals, and trespassing incidents are as sky-high as ever. Also, train riders may be decent sometimes, but a lot of them are criminals and some are very dangerous. Every so often a story pops up where some suburban kid decides to ride the rails and ends up dead. It's not a safe environment for anyone. So, nothing ghostly or mysterious to report, but please make sure you stay well clear of the tracks. We don't like hitting people, we don't sign up to watch people end things, and a lot of coworkers have a degree of PTSD afterwards. One time I went skinny dipping with some friends, and then we all stood next to the train, bearing it all as a train went by. Hopefully it brightened the engineer's day. I think it depends on what gender you are. Well, since we're on this channel, it was most likely a group of slightly overweight, hairy dudes. AKA just what the doctor ordered. 10 out of 10, bloody gorgeous. I've got to be honest, as a nominally straight guy, if I drove past a bunch of lined-up, thick, undressed boys jiggling away, I would be laughing for the rest of my day. Brilliant. Keep it up, viewers. Bit late to the party, but here we go. Probably the strangest or most messed up thing would be the time we hit a flock of sheep. At line speed, which is about 110 km per hour, or 70 miles. No idea how they got there. I guess the fence fell over or the gate was left open, but the first I saw of them was what appeared to be a long grass covering the tracks ahead. A second later, we realized they were sheep, so start leaning on the whistle. A matter of seconds after that, and we are on top of them. I can't forget the awful, continuous noise it made, nor can I unsee the bits of wool and guts flicking up on the windscreen. The smell itself was horrendous, especially once the heat of dead sheep started cooking itself on hot traction motors underneath. We pulled up at the next crossing loop to cross another train, so we got out and viewed the damage. I used to have photos, but that phone has since died. My uncle's best friend was a conductor and engineer for a train a few years ago. He told me that one night he was going up through North Florida and saw some deer on the track, so he laid on the horn to scare them off, and all but one of them ran off the tracks. The last one ran in front of the train, along the tracks. He had to try to slow the train slightly to keep from running the deer over, but just couldn't. The train caught up with the animal and he lost sight of it, believing he'd just run it over. When he got to the next city and slowed down for a turn, he noticed something on the side of the engine. He leaned out to see the deer laying on a set of steps just out of view from his seat. It ended up jumping off in the middle of the city, a few hundred miles from its home. I'm not a train engineer, but once as a kid, 13 or 14, I was forgotten at a skating rink lock-in. About 8 a.m, the owner said that she had to go, so I took off walking towards home. It was about 12 miles away. After about a mile, I knew I could get on the tracks and it would take me right in front of my house. I was walking when I heard a train was coming in the distance. I moved off about 30 feet as it approached, to the side away from the tracks. I witnessed a dog walk up to the tracks and lay its head flat on one of the tracks. As the train was getting closer, I called to the dog. I was about 50 feet away. It didn't respond. I'm sure the conductor didn't see it, but it severed the dog's head away from the body. I was totally freaked out. I cried for about an hour. Then I decided to bury the dog with the rocks beside the tracks. I still had about 3 hours before I'd arrive home walking. As I walked, I came to the conclusion that I'd witnessed this, so I would not ever decide to take things into my own hands that way, since it was very disturbing to those left to witness. I've told the story to others since, and one time a vet tech told me that the dog must have known it was sick. When I got home and the others woke up, I told them about what I'd witnessed and they accused me of making it up since they forgot me. It stuck with me for a very long time. I'm no engineer, but I saw a Domino's delivery guy make a delivery to a train that had been at a crossing for an hour or so. What did the weird kid do to earn that reputation? The weird kid at my school always claimed she was a wizard, and when someone spoke to her when she was, quote, casting a spell, i.e. screaming at the ground, she would turn around and either scream in their face or slap them. I was new to the school at the time, and I got screamed at because I was legitimately worried that she might be hurt or something. There was this guy, one class below me, who just ate everything. Once he went to the front of the classroom where the sink thingy is, took a big stack of paper towels back to his place, and just started eating it mid-lesson. Another time he drank a Capri Sun in class, and when he was finished, he just ate the package with straw and everything. The weirdest thing was when he ate a toy car that the teacher brought to show something. He just sat in front of the teacher's desk, took the car from it, and swallowed it without saying anything. He brought a live lobster to a middle school dance and let it go on the dance floor during the dance. It wasn't even a question of who would have done this. It was Nate. Nate did it. He thought he was a robot. Often you'd find him in the halls, alone, talking to electronics about destroying the human race or having a conversation with a locker. Flicked the bean during class, then brought a cake the next day to apologize. There was a girl in my school that got caught trying to color her entire tongue with a black Sharpie in like 7th grade. It was honestly surreal to witness. The teacher was so confused and just walked her to the principal. A few years later, she was expelled for drinking booze during school on multiple occasions. Did a countdown to his toots like they were a fricking moon launch. Of all the things I thought I would find in this thread, inspiration wasn't one of them. I mean, this guy just sounds fricking funny, and like he was waiting to basically age into dadhood. Godspeed, sir. Pulled out his armpit or downstairs hair one by one and ate them. Ate a live lizard while the entire school was hanging out on the football field during a fire drill. Set his arm on fire on a school trip to France. Sprayed his arm with deodorant for about a whole minute before getting someone to light it. It wouldn't go out until he used the tap in the bathroom to douse it with water. He ended up with blisters and permanent scarring. So the school trip ends and we get to go back to school the week after. All of a sudden, me and 4 other kids got pulled into a classroom to be questioned by police and the head teacher. He basically told his mum that we did it to him. Obviously this didn't stick as we all had the same story. If I had Facebook, I'd look him up to see how life is for him nowadays. Screw people like that. A classmate in elementary broke his arm doing dumb crap and tried to frame us for it because he was so embarrassed. He pulled some crap like that later in school life too. My man would wear a stormtrooper costume and taped an old flip-up phone to his arm and pretend to talk through it. This was in high school. He was particularly odd because he was like a born genius, so he'd often get bored in class and do some weird stuff. To be honest, looking back on it, I feel really bad for the guy. He was incredibly smart but had zero social skills and an unfortunate lump of fat right on his forehead that people would bully him for. It was also like he tried to get in trouble every chance he could. Anyways, some things he did that came to mind. He would pick at and pop his pimples in class. Like pimples on his arms and shoulders, he'd just go to town on them and be all red and marked by the end. When I was in school, we had a serious no electronics policy. A few times he'd bring his Nintendo DS and play that thing full volume and of course off to detention. Because he was so smart, he'd often correct teachers and other students, but in the rudest way possible. And he was always technically correct, if that makes any sense, also often resulting in detention. Can't think of any more specifically fun stories. He rarely showed up to school, to be honest. Maybe because he felt he didn't need to, or maybe because everyone, including the teachers, weren't always the nicest to the kid. Got caught whacking it in the school bathroom, then later got his member stuck in a shampoo bottle. Guys, if you get your small sir stuck in a shampoo bottle and your mum has to take you to hospital to remedy the situation, you need to keep that to yourselves. There is no teenager in the world who's going to keep that knowledge to themselves. Yar, he dressed as a pirate every day for 8 years. Legitimately said he was leaving rural Michigan to move to the Caribbean and become a pirate. Changed his name to Blackbeard Ryan. Raised his hand, and when the teacher called on him to answer his question, he started singing Frere Jacques. Cut himself in class, waited for the blood to congeal a bit, and then just ate it. Just writing that made me gag. Years later, he got arrested for stabbing someone. Well, did the deed with a goat lad. He had a notoriety for crapping his pants at least once a day and was super casual about it. I remember I was behind him in the hall one day when I saw a massive log just plop out of his short legs. He looked back at it and just kept on strutting. Whoa, wait, what the heck? Was the kid just walking around fully loaded all day? And crap coming out of his pants was a once-a-day thing? Yeah, seriously, it got so bad that administration got involved and ended up requiring him to wear diapers. He was at a high level of not giving a frick. Damn, you usually don't get to that point until you're old. Maybe he's not giving a frick because he's too busy giving a crap. He drew Pokemons getting busy with each other during class, for a few years. Collected earthworms when it rained in the pouch of his hoodie, and then laid them out in the schoolyard spelling his own name. He cried when he saw that it had been scraped from the pavement the next day. By that time, he was around 13. Predictably, people, by which I mean we, started calling him Worm Kid. He got expelled around a year later for throwing a fistful of earth at a teacher. To elaborate on him having to leave the school, this act of dirt tossing happened inside of a classroom at close proximity when he'd been called to the blackboard during a Latin lesson. I'm from Europe. The teacher completely lost their crap. The moist soil was all in her hair, and she later said a couple of live beetles and little pebbles or bone splinters were also found in that mix, though I can't say whether that's true. I mean, there were so many examples, but this one stuck out to me. There were twin boys in my high school who were just odd. We were in Spanish class together, and the teacher had this habit of making beeping sounds to get the attention of students who were talking. So one day that's happening, and the teacher goes, beep, 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 and one of the twins shouts, "Fires and missiles!" and crawls under his desk and runs out of the room. I thought it was so funny, I about fell out of my chair laughing. I don't know. Is that an end of the world reference from that kid, or just very specifically random? The age of this post would imply that it was a bit too recent for it to reference that specific animation. I guess the narrator will never know. When we were about 15, Harrison, we were all addressed by our surnames, decided to one day wrap his eggplant in adhesive tape during a biology lesson. I can't remember why nor how he managed to remove it, but I was impressed. He also held the record for stabbing into the desk between each finger of his outstretched hand with a compass, a very sharp point, as fast as possible despite hitting a finger at least once. He later became a distinguished surgeon. He would bark like a dog when talked to. He probably had some mental problems, but most people just avoided him. A girl in my year at school told us she has a ghost in her bedroom and it told her that if she didn't brush her teeth, it would burn her house down. Another girl said she wanted to do the deed with our headmaster, but she was like 7 at the time, and she used to scratch people in the face like a cat. I held the door open for her once and she flipped me off and called me a fricking B-word. I knew a girl who'd developed much earlier than everyone else. She had like double D's and severe acne in grade 6. She used to act out weird scenes from TV shows by herself at recess. She was the type who told everyone she had a boyfriend who had a Porsche, but went to a different school. Again, we were like 12. People made fun of her for the usual things and crap she did, but one day things took a dark and strange turn. Some girl named Katie said something to her in line after lunch, and she lost it. She smoked Katie in the head with her flute case and then hit some other kid who wasn't saying anything. She then spit chocolate milk all over a teacher who asked her what was going on. Everyone was pretty shocked, but then she proceeded to sit down on the ground, started to cry, and peed her pants right there. The ground was kind of sloped away from the school, so a puddle formed and then created like a stream of pee all the way to the field, maybe about 15 to 20 feet. Everyone just stood there in shock at how many things had just happened in the span of 90 seconds. For those asking what she's doing now, I asked a couple of people if anyone knew, and I was told last they'd heard she had a daughter with her partner and seemed happy. We were freshmen in an urban high school. He made increasingly wild claims like he had a bunch of illegal automatic weapons, he made poison darts and blow guns, his sensei could outrun an arrow fired from a bow, and he was learning how to do it himself, and that he had a nitro kit in his Trans Am that he used to outrun police. He was transferred to another school. The next I heard of him 2 years later, he had crashed into a brick wall and died while fleeing the police. The report said he lost control when he engaged his nitro kit. ate a battery in class, peed in a bottle on a bus full of 60 kids, chipped his tooth sucking on a Tajin packet. All of his siblings are named the same name, Martin. Is his name Martin? Yes. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'm not really sure what this guy did, but he was a fun guy to be around, presumably just ugly and visibly mentally ill. Once he said he was going to bring a surprise to a pep rally and got talked to by police, but it turned out just to be a bucket full of candy. He got nominated Homecoming King, despite the principal trying to stop him from being elected. He won. He had a ton of school spirit too. It was really weird. And yeah, a lot of people have concerns about it being a Carrie type situation, but I don't think it was, as the kids said that the principal didn't like him at all and seemed to wait for him to make mistakes, just so that he could dish out a punishment. I overheard the guy talking about it with his friends, and I remember that he was called to the principal's office to talk about it. But he didn't say anything about the principal being scared of him, being teased or anything. My memory's a little hazy, but I'm pretty sure it was just because he wouldn't fit the school's image. That's what the kid felt, at least. I finally found out what made him the weird kid. He tore up a tree in the school parking lot and beat a car with it. Other than that, though, he seemed well liked. We had that horse girl. She always pranced around like a horse, would snort in surprise, that sort of thing. In grade 5 and 6, she always wanted to play horses. My friends and I told her that was so lame and then would go off to play wolves instead. Took a bite of a urinal cake because he was curious. Ugh. This one kid at the tender age of 12 found a used rubber in the gutter, washed it out, and then subsequently propositioned a girl in his class by showing it to her and asking her to do the deed with him in the toilets at lunch. I was the president of the improv club at my high school. The weird kid was a member. Now, remember that episode of The Office when Michael would interrupt every improv scene as a cop? It was like that, except this kid always had an evil or dark magic theme. Characters in the scenes turned out to be his evil brother from the Dark Outlands. Imaginary props would turn into mythic swords formed from shadows. But this kid was so desperately unpopular, no one had the heart to kick him out of the club. I mean, it kinda sounds like this kid just wanted to LARP. Yeah, can you imagine how much he would have loved that? The narrator sincerely hopes this kid found the LARP Society, or at the very least, discovered RPGs, and finally found his people. He would crank it everywhere and be caught, like all the time. In class, on the football field, in the tuba room, you name it. He also claimed with all seriousness to everyone that he was dating the most popular girl at our school. She was in a long-term relationship with another one of the popular kids, so everyone knew he was full of crap, but he stuck to his guns. Wore the same blue dress every single day to school. Sat in the hall by herself during all class parties. I know she was a Jehovah's Witness, but it wasn't until I was older that I understood what that meant, and how isolating it must have been for her as an 8-year-old and up. The only one in that tiny farm town with nobody even wanting to sit by her on the bus. I still feel it in my gut when I think about her from time to time, 5 decades later. She never did anything to any of us. Sorry, Ramona. I went to Parkland a few years back. In my first period, we had Nicholas Cruz in our science class. Whenever he was called on, no matter what question, he'd always yell out B, as in that's the answer. He sat in the middle of class and one girl kept flirting with him by stabbing him in the back of the head with a pencil, while her friend laughed along. We graduated before he committed mass murder. In 4th grade, this kid brought metal Chinese throwing stars to school and started throwing them around the classroom. He was gone for about a week, and then a few weeks after that, he pulled out some nunchucks and hit a girl in the face. We didn't see him for the rest of the year. 5th grade starts, and there he is. It was show and tell, and he brought a small pet turtle. He was in front of class and took the turtle out and said, "My turtle does tricks. Look, he can break dance." He then put it on its back and spun it like a top. It went flying off the stool onto the hard ground and landed on its shell. He was called Turtle or Turtle Boy the rest of school until he disappeared in junior high. This was in the 80s. I wonder how he turned out. Frickin' weirdo. It sounds like he was trying to be a preteen Ninja Turtle. In high school, a kid had upper teeth like a horse, always out of his mouth and never brushed them. When a teacher was doing roll call and said if we had nicknames or alternate names we wanted to be called, his name was called and he said, "I want to be called Shadow." like an edgelord. He always never did schoolwork and instead watched Pokemon in class and played Pokemon while walking around the halls. He never washed his hands after going to the washroom, and multiple times I heard him moaning in the washroom stalls about different Pokemon and trainers, such as Gardevoir, Lopunny, Leafeon, Misty, Jessie, and a lot more. Every so often you'd see him also choking his chicken in the middle of class while staring at the teacher or some girls in the same class. Got into a fight with someone because he thought he was tough and wanted to show off to a girl. Also, never showered. This was all in grade 12. I'd like to mention as well, I'm not bashing Pokemon, I freaking love Pokemon. He would go around asking people, if you knew an alien that looked like, and he'd give a description, and you really loved them, would you do the deed with that alien? Alien description changed a lot from question to question, and if you answered him, he'd keep asking the questions with different types of aliens. Key point being that you always shared an emotional connection with the alien. Poor kid was just trying to sort out his alien fantasy, I think. This kid in elementary school who had to be the first at everything. And no, I don't mean like super competitive in sports or whatever. I mean he had to be first in line, first in school, first out, among other things. He'd be in front of the school before it even opened to the students, like 6:30 a.m. Class started at 7, waiting for that clock hand to touch 6:30 so he could sprint in and sit first in his class. He would sit near the very front of the class so he could be first in line. He would always, without a doubt, raise his hand as soon as the teacher asked a question to start the class. Most of the time, he didn't even know the answer. The teacher would pick him, and he'd start frantically looking for the answer, or he'd make stuff up. As soon as class ended, he'd sprint across the whole school so he could be the first out the doors. And here's some more weirdness. Every day during recess, he'd always hang out right next to the fence line closest to the school. As soon as the teacher would blow the whistle, he'd be right there immediately. The teacher would tell everyone to turn in their homework from the night before in this basket thing, and he'd grab it and book it to go turn it in first. Problem was, the basket was on the opposite side of the classroom. Remember, he sat up front. More often than not, I remember some poor soul or chair or desk getting in his way and getting trampled. He'd always be the first to finish his tests or quizzes. I never really paid attention to his grades, but I assumed he did fine since he never failed a grade. I remember blazing through a math test. As soon as I stood up to turn it in, he jumped in front of me and handed in his test first. I don't even know if he finished it. That boy had better be a NASCAR driver now. I just realized this was like 20 years ago and I still remember him in great detail. The weird kid in my year basically started out as a meme. He was odd, socially isolated, talked to himself a little, nerdy, terrible at sports, cannon fodder for the popular crowd. We were, and still are, friends though. Freshman year, a joke starts going around that he should be prom king. No one takes it too seriously, but it's considered funny. French teacher picks it up and supports it. 4 years later, he's been so heavily memed, everyone loves him, and he gets elected homecoming king. Ha! Look at that. Crappy behavior and social isolation, leading to what seems like quite a positive outcome. Good for him. I hope his novelty value coasted through to some more tangible friendships. This was in 6th grade. She told everyone she was raised by wolves. She'd draw a paw print on her palm to show as proof, howled during recess, and would growl at the younger kids. There were times when she'd chase around the younger kids, and they looked like they were having fun, so I guess it was fine. But then she'd hide under the playground to meditate, but she was really just peeing herself. Then she'd come back out and continue to chase the kids. She also smelled really bad, like the whole classroom stunk because of her. Teacher pulled her aside a few times and asked her about her hygiene, but nothing changed. He was quiet at first, so me and my friends became friends with him. Months later, he confessed his love to one of them and got rejected and started stalking us by finding out where we lived and, more to the point, where we had to get restraining orders on him that he kept breaking. This was in middle school, 8th grade. Me and the kid weren't really friends, but were well acquainted with each other as we had a lot of classes together. One morning, yes, early morning, we go to our first class. There were big tables with 2 chairs on each side, so nothing was really separating us. My table was in the back of the room and he sat right next to me. Some time passes and I suddenly hear small but fast movements. I turn to see this kid figuratively whacking the mule next to me. And this wasn't any subtle jerk, this was one of those "I'm in the zone" jerks. I scream and 2 others across from us realize what's happening and they back away as quickly as possible. One just falls out of her chair and starts scurrying to the front of the room. He gets pulled out of class, and a few weeks later, everyone is calling him the math abater, because we were in math class when this happened. Looking back now, it was absolutely hilarious. In high school, our weird kid was a guy who was legally blind but could see general shapes and light. He was obsessed with the idea that he could be a truck driver, constantly made engine noises all the time. He was also grossly creepy towards anyone he thought sounded female, like would feel people up because he said he didn't know because he couldn't see what he was touching. He did that to a couple of my friends. I was nice to him for a while, but he kept hitting on me because my voice was high, and eventually I dodged him in the halls. I feel kinda bad for him though. Lots of people would just go silent and still if he approached because he was so creepy. I did some low-level parkour to get away from him once. I think he might have been overcompensating for being blind, and I did want to be nice to him. But he was also definitely a low-key predator, because how does the school prove the blind kid is really doing that and not accidentally brushing them when he was trying to find his way around? Who was the most despicable defendant you've ever seen in court? Defended an old guy, kind of driver who hit and killed a mentally challenged girl who had run across 6 lanes of traffic against the signal. The guy did nothing wrong. The worst part about the situation was that we were being paid by the dead girl's family insurance company, who the family was suing for benefits. I defended a guy who sent number 2 through the mail to his ex-girlfriend from state prison. I don't know how it got past prison officials, but it did, and he didn't deny sending it. However, we went to trial because he wanted me to argue that the number 2 was expressive speech and thus protected by the First Amendment. We lost. In short, crap case, we lost. I had a brilliant gentleman on probation for narcotics trafficking, and he was not permitted to own or use a cell phone. He went in for a substance test with his probation officer, and his cell phone rang in his pocket. The PO went to take the phone from his pocket and also pulled out a large baggie of white snow that he bought to his substance test. So in my state, if you're in a relationship with someone or had been and you commit certain crimes, they get tagged as domestic violence. This tag gives additional penalties. Long story short, my client received a down-under kiss from a girl and then hit her. We went to trial because the state wanted to say that one beige was a relationship and my guy didn't want to do the domestic violence classes. So we took it to the jury, who ruled that one such act isn't a relationship. I've always wondered how many beiges is a relationship. Prior public defender here. Cases involving crimes against kids are the worst. That aside, I once defended a very nice 80-ish-year-old man who'd been married for like 50 years, several kids, grandkids, and great-grandkids. He'd been charged with indecent behavior with a horse. Turns out, most of the community knew he'd been intimate with livestock for many years, and they'd usually look the other way. But I guess he went too far with the horse. He pled guilty to the felony, but of course got no jail time. It's quite funny that it was acceptable until this man was caught quite literally horsing around, if you'll pardon the pun. I wonder if he had restrained his behavior to simple horseplay, it would have been more acceptable. Although the offense itself wasn't particularly repugnant, I once had to defend someone who had been charged for driving with a suspended license because he was, quite honestly, in his and my opinion, on his way to an AA meeting to prevent himself from drinking. He was a very serious alcoholic who had been convicted of impaired driving several times, and he had found that the only way he could stay sober was by attending AA meetings regularly. On this particular day, his license was suspended because of a prior conviction. He lived quite a distance outside of town, and his friend, who typically drove him into town, cancelled at the last minute. In a panic, worried that without attending the meeting he had relapse and inevitably end up hurting someone else, quite possibly by driving impaired again, he drove his own vehicle, stone-cold sober, into town. On the way, he was stopped by the police and charged with driving with a suspended license. In court, I wasn't sure whether to tell the judge that despite the delay on the roadside and the laying of a very serious additional criminal charge to this poor guy's history, he managed to call his AA sponsor, who picked him up on the side of the highway and drove him to the meeting just in time to arrive only a few minutes late and stay sober for an additional 24 hours. Albeit with a reduced likelihood of the same positive outcome on the sobriety front the following day. My worst had to be the, quote, gentleman who spent years using his position to commit the unspeakable act. He videotaped it, so we had to watch at trial. We knew the reason he insisted on going to trial was because he wanted to see the video again. A buddy of mine is a defense attorney who takes a lot of murder cases. He said on a few occasions his defendants became visibly excited when the crime scene photos were shown in court. Just, ugh. Immigration law often intersects with criminal defense law, since having criminal convictions will get you banned or kicked out from many countries. In my first year of practicing, I had to argue for a man convicted of a laundry list of awful offenses against his daughters to be allowed into my country, in order to help care for his disabled young step-granddaughter. Reading the details of what he did to his daughters was horrifying. The now adult daughters wrote letters saying they'd forgiven him and had no problems trusting him around their own kids. I just couldn't stop thinking that this guy was possibly going to be left alone with a little girl who couldn't move or talk, let alone defend herself from a serial convict of some of the worst crimes you can do. Another weird one was a guy who had a felony conviction for threatening and planning to kill his previous attorney. He needed to clear up this issue because of a job opportunity in my country. He sent me this bizarre manifesto about the government conspiracies to poison people via tap water and how it was all the fault of the homosexual girly men in powerful positions. I was scared I'd be his next target, because he'd clearly had severe untreated mental issues, and all it would take was one lazy or sloppy border officer to let him slip through. No details because of confidentiality. I had to work on a file doing research. The specific issues were whether it was possible to have accidental penetration, basically whether the wrong hole is ever a real thing, and if so, if it could result in tearing the butt and hoo-ha together to make one big unhappy hole. Short answers: apparently yes. Risk factors include inexperience in the bedroom, inebriation, and the dark. And as to the second, yes as well. Apparently there are very rare cases of consensual, regular adult fun times doing the same thing. So, I hope that image doesn't hit you at an inopportune moment. Oh, I had a guy stand out of a sunroof and point an AR at an undercover cop. The guy was on probation when this happened. Coworker presented a guy that beat and burned a kitten and recorded it. She had to watch the video and she came to my office crying afterwards. Screw that guy. Not worse, in so much as it was serious, but worse as in, God, do I really have to do this case? One time I was trying to defend a guy that was alleged to have thrown his own wee-wee in a woman's face. The kicker? The guy was an inmate and the woman was a guard at the prison, so it really takes things up a notch penalty-wise. Our defense? Her face tested positive for urea, a substance that is technically in human urine, but is also in an enormous variety of female beauty products. We basically had to argue that she put pee in her own face through one of these products, and they couldn't prove the defendant didn't just throw water on her. I mean, I feel bad for that guard. I wouldn't want someone to throw that stuff in my face. Criminal defense attorney here. I hate doing any adult video or picture cases involving prohibited subject matter. Not only is the crime usually completely reprehensible, but then I have to go and review the discovery myself, which I absolutely hate. Thankfully, haven't had one of those cases in a while. I also hate civil asset forfeiture, but for an entirely different reason. When I get a substance case where the client's assets are seized, not only do I have to deal with the criminal's charges, but I'll also handle the civil asset forfeiture because that's what my firm does. I hate civil laws, but it's quasi-criminal, so I can deal with it. But the whole asset forfeiture scheme is bullcrap. In my jurisdiction, if over 25k is seized, no criminal conviction is necessary for the DA to keep the money, which is entirely backwards. We'll still have the civil trial, but it's by a lesser standard than a criminal trial, as in proved beyond a reasonable doubt versus clear and convincing evidence. There was a movement to reform the asset forfeiture laws, but the DA's association opposed it and effectively killed the reform. Their reasoning being that the DA offices and police departments allocate and rely on asset forfeiture for a part of their budgets, which is essentially admitting that they have a cash incentive to rob people. Ugh, that's some bullcrap that I think is pretty common, sadly. In my country of origin, there was an investigation into police responding instantaneously into speed camera cases as opposed to more important, pressing time-sensitive matters because they were told it would affect their budget. Complete crap. Lawyer who did criminal work experience whilst training. I was part of the legal team that defended a man who killed his partner in their living room. We argued diminished responsibility, as in he was only guilty of manslaughter and not murder, as at the time of the attack he lacked the relevant mental capacity. Jury found against him and he was sent down for 25 years. Last thing he said to me was that he hopes he gets to go into solitary with his guitar and that he'd be better than Eric Clapton by the time he got out. This is a UK case, and the client had been in and out of prison all his life, so I assumed that he would know if he was allowed his guitar while inside. I took his word for it, at least. The jury didn't believe that his previous and ongoing psychological problems, well evidenced by expert witnesses, had an effect on his mental state to such an extent that he lacked the mental capacity to commit murder. They believed that he'd committed the act because he wanted to either kill or cause serious physical harm to his partner at the time. This is the men's REA for murder in the UK. No, I don't feel bad about assisting in his case. He was innocent until proven guilty, and in the UK we have equality of arms in criminal cases, which means his team has the same resources as the prosecution's. I sat on a case like this once. Manslaughter and time served for essentially the same crime, only the victim died in the hospital days later. The defense was able to successfully argue that her poor health contributed more to the death than the beating did. Probably the hardest part was watching the victim's family react to the verdict. I worked a brief stint at the public defender's office during law school. While I took care of a lot of bail hearings and other simpler things. If you spend any time working for the PD, you'll quickly learn the names of the repeat offenders who come in on a monthly, if not weekly, basis. One such fellow, let's call him Stan, liked to do substances. I was informed by the DA's office that he had a warrant out for a probation violation, so I gave Stan a call and told him to turn himself in. Now, as I said, Stan was a regular and knew all of the drills. If you turn yourself in or get picked up after a certain time, you wear your street clothes in front of the judge instead of the jumpsuit. As it turns out, he turned himself in with a smack pipe in his pocket. This can't get any worse, right? Wrong. I'm thinking that Stan has to be the dumbest man to face that courtroom when I looked up and see him being escorted into the courtroom by the bailiff while wearing a shirt that says, "High as F." Let's just say his bail hearing was about as successful as the rest of his life choices. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Public defender here. This is a matter of public record and I still owe a duty of confidentiality. A client of our office was convicted of attacking someone, defined as a non-consensual physical contact, with motives to the unspeakable act. The alleged victim being a very young relative of the defendant, making it also a crime of domestic. It's by far the darkest case I've been assigned. I can say without reservation that he got a fair shake. I had to defend a guy who was caught in a public park after dark, spanking the mule, with used, dirty baby diapers. The police rolled up on him doing it and shined their spotlight on him, and he looked at them and said, "I have problems." Also defended a guy that walked up to a rival gang member and shot him in the face. Then he and his buddies fled and got involved in a high-speed chase, and he was shooting out of the window at the chasing cops. I had to interview him alone at the downtown Modesto County Jail, which is a total crap hole. It was the first murderer I defended, and I was scared. He turned out to be very polite to me, though. Worst I had was when my client was charged with impersonating a police officer. It was the worst because it was so ridiculous. He was 70 years old and was going to the Social Security office. When he went through the metal detector, he had a police shield that he put in the tray with his keys and phone. He collected police memorabilia and liked to carry it around. The guard at the metal detector arrested him. Oh, that's really sad. I hope this got thrown out and that the old guy didn't get put through too much trouble. Unfortunately, there isn't much detail in the replies to the story. Murder. Started out as a gang initiation carjacking, turned to murder when the juvenile initiate panicked. Juvenile self-deleted at the juvie. Client was torn up as well and wanted to plead guilty. Did a psych evaluation and did a full pre-trial motions practice that lasted a year before we scheduled the plea. He wrote a very heartfelt apology to the girl's dad and I gave it to him after the plea. Still filed habeas against me 2 years later, but that was sort of expected. Another one was doing the worst sort of crimes I've ever tried against his own family. After a vague outcry, police came to the house and recovered evidence from the family's bedrooms in the trash can. Almost got that evidence suppressed because the search was without a warrant, but with permission from his wife. He had previously refused consent, but was led away to the station for questioning. Stories differ as to whether he did it voluntarily or was coerced or even just flat out arrested. And they re-asked for consent from the wife, with no husband to contradict her. This one went almost a year as well, with a metric ton of motions. In the end, what the police got from the search corroborated the witness testimony to the T, and he eventually decided to plea. But the one that affected me the most was a little kid who literally grew into a man while locked up for 2 cases. 2 cases of aggravated attacks and another case of armed robbery. He stayed in jail almost 3 years while the cases worked themselves out. In the aggravated attack case, he was alleged to have shot 2 lifelong gangbangers due to some dispute. He was a skinny kid, maybe 150 pounds, soaking wet, and these gangbangers were all over 6 foot and heavily built, and a long rap sheet each. Cross-examination on their records went fricking textbook. They each had about 5 convictions, and I asked about the first 3 and then let them hang themselves by saying how they're different now, and how that's all old news, and they don't do that no more. Right. And then you hit them with the subsequent convictions. You wouldn't think that would work, that they'd know their own record and they wouldn't fall for this trick, but they do. Every single time. Not guilty, but still locked up because of the armed robbery. Armed robbery went to trial and we had an expert on eyewitness testimony, Professor Brigham. He was a professor at FSU along with Elizabeth Loftus, the preeminent expert in the field of human memory and eyewitness testimony. He dazzled the jury. Truthfully, I can't take credit for any of this. Not guilty again. A few days later, he came to see me at my office. I still remembered a skinny little kid. Not anymore. In street clothes, this guy was built. Somehow I missed all of that, either looking through the partition glass at the jail or being preoccupied with the other stuff in court. We always had a good rapport, so we spent a good hour talking about future plans. That'd be the last time I'd see him, however. A year or so later, he got arrested for murder and is now serving a life sentence. I think that if he had been convicted of some of the other charges, maybe he wouldn't have that murder. Maybe if he'd been away for 5 or 10 years, he could have come out more mature. Not as a 20-year-old jacked-up kid who's been deprived of fun things for the past 3 years. I deliberately kept myself ignorant of the specifics of the murder. Maybe he killed another useless gangbanging psychopath. Maybe he killed a nun. I think it's better not knowing. Worked on a case in which the defendant was accused of decapitating his grandma with a bread knife. Gruesome and scary. Well, really violent cases of the unspeakable act, and by that I mean when the victim was beaten, among other things. They're never easy, particularly because the perpetrators tend to be extreme narcissists who are very angry at women because reasons. Elliot Rodger, the 2014 Santa Barbara killer, is a good example of that type and was much more articulate than most. The narcissism makes defending them a real chore because they tend to be delusional. The victim will never testify. Less creepily, and setting aside sovereign citizens and their ilk, I had a fellow who was dealing smack in a local bar when the cops did a closing check and recognized him as someone whose parole conditions prohibited him from being in bars. He brightly fled to the men's room, a dead end, to flush his dope, but they were right on his heels, so they had him. This frustrated him so badly that he pooped his pants and tried to fling the resulting product at the officers. He was never really clear on why I didn't think this was a triable case. I had a client who was a narco in Colombia extradited to the US. Killed more people than he could count. Actually, lost track. A guy who killed another person in a road rage incident and shot his dog. Strafed bullets across the windshield to scare the guy's wife and then went home and went to bed. I could go on for days. A friend of mine's dad is a defense attorney. He once had a client who strangled a working girl to death because she laughed at him because he couldn't get hard after shooting smack directly into his eggplant. Her dad's half-assed defense was, well, Your Honor, in his defense, he was really high from the smack, so he clearly wasn't thinking. The guy was quickly sentenced to many years in prison. I mean, what else can you say in a case like that? I don't know how anyone can even do a half-assed job of something like that, let alone put any proper effort into defending a guy with so many problematic things going on at once. Takes a different sort of person to work as a public defender, I guess. The 90-year-old woman who routinely smuggled substances in her hoo-ha into prisons was more interesting than most. The gang murderers are pretty routine at this point. As a young lady, it's the ones who aren't killing in the name of territory, street cred, among other things that get to me. I was really affected by a particularly brutal, cold, calculated, sick 30-something man accused of murder. He was eerily calm and cocky about his encounter with an underage girl he met and chatted up for about 20 minutes that resulted ultimately in her drowning with suspicious surrounding circumstances. He was obviously disturbed and it was very unsettling just being near him. Images of him smiling for the news cameras in the courtroom will weirdly pop into my head on a somewhat random basis, and it still gives me the heebie-jeebies. The act he put on when he insisted on being put on the stand in a trial ruined him. He would have walked but for his ridiculous testimony. Within seconds, the jury, who had been paying close attention previously, looked horrified as he told these stories and stopped taking notes. Their minds were made up as soon as he opened his creepy mouth. He was quickly convicted. We did a really stellar job in his case, but he dug his own grave. Justice was served. Copyright defense attorney here. Lots of people have been put through the ringer over BitTorrent downloads in the last few years. My favorite story is not from my client, but from the same case. During one of the first civil BitTorrent file-sharing cases, it became clear to me, and the plaintiff, that one defendant was lying. The guy had erased his hard drive to destroy evidence after receiving the discovery request for the computer. He then reinstalled Windows and named the drive Squeaky. He put it into an encrypting USB enclosure and handed it over. It took them a while, but they figured it out. The guy got hit with a $250,000 judgment for 5 downloads. So the guy was fined $250,000 for downloading 5 items? Like 5 movies or something? That's not justice. You ruin someone's life for downloading a movie. That's totally unbalanced. Okay, I'll pop in. Years ago, there was a silent alarm that went off at the petting part of the zoo at about 3 a.m. Usually nothing, so the cops don't show up lights flashing and guns blazing, so they're walking around taking a look and find a guy on a stool just going at it with a cow. Now, this is one of the most unfortunate-looking human beings you can imagine. Dude is hideous, and honestly, you kind of feel sorry for him and understand that the petting zoo is a logical place, in his mind, to find partners. Cops arrest him and put him in holding. Because of the timing of it all, it was just before a shift change, so every cop working in the precinct has to come by and laugh at the cow puffer. Then they tell the story to all the guys coming on shift, so they all go by and do the same thing. We got an initial hearing that morning, it was a big city. When I tell the judge that story, he throws out the case and tells the guy that he's been punished enough by the embarrassment. A friend of the family is a lawyer who has a favorite story that he likes to tell. Basically, he had to defend someone who just randomly punched a stranger, a 90-year-old grandmother, in the face one day, in front of a dozen witnesses, evidently just because he was in a bad mood. The only defense he could come up to give before the judge was, "Your Honor, he only hit her once." Have you ever interviewed someone and wondered, what is wrong with you? I once had a candidate for an intermediate-level analyst job brag during an interview that he used to work other jobs and play poker, while working his primary office job. For example, for about 2 weeks before he was caught and got fired from all his jobs, he'd take long lunches. No one knew where he went between 10:30 and 1:30. Turns out he'd gotten a job making pizzas at the next-door pizza restaurant and worked the lunch rush. He also bragged about playing poker at work constantly. This was in the late 2000s while online poker was still in its big boom. He bragged about these things to me as if I, a relatively young professional at the time, would think he was cool. Or maybe he thought it demonstrated his ability to multitask and still get his job done. I have no idea. Either way, we did not extend him an offer. Had a candidate come in who said how hot my admin was and asked if she was single or open to Freaky Fridays. What, switching bodies with our teenage daughter to learn a lesson about considering others' points of view and importance of family? No, but the implications were definitely regarding bodies and swapping something. During the interview, I asked, "I see you've managed a vegetarian restaurant." "What? It says here you managed a vegetarian restaurant on your CV. "Oh, I guess I did write that. Not really, though. My girlfriend had an art exhibition and I organized the sandwiches for the opening. They were vegetarian." This was a candidate that was otherwise pretty impressive seeming, and he had been among the favorite candidates for a sought-after position. The interview had gone quite well up until this point. I met him later at a party. He had no memory of me. "Oh no, it was more of a catering firm. I meant to change that. I had someone helping me with my resume and we just put that as a placeholder. But apparently I forgot to change that. I apologize. In fact, it was just me and my girlfriend who started a small catering business and we did a few jobs, but we realized we couldn't live off the profits and decided to put that idea on the shelf, and here I am now." You see, you've just got to spin these things quicker. Reading replies like the one you've just finished hearing makes me realize that fluent bullcrap really is such a vital interview skill. That's probably why so many other work horror stories we read about seem to get such a wealth of crazy and unqualified people in them, presumably people who've lied and inflated their small activities into impressive achievements on their CV and talked them up in the interview. This kid, probably 18 to 20, just started picking his nose, like knuckle deep and digging for gold in the middle of his food service job interview. I wrapped that up real quick and didn't hire him. I interviewed a girl once, and while we were talking, I was looking over her resume. Please note that English is her first language, or else this wouldn't have humored me so much. Her mission statement on her resume was as follows: "Along with my detail-oriented and organizational skills, I will encourage team to work cooperatively and creativity to provide an understanding the visual aspects of our work." This was for an admin position at a law firm. Not sure what the visual aspects of our work entailed in this position, honestly. I read that over about 5 or 6 times, worried that I was having a stroke, so I didn't really hear much of anything else she said during the interview. I haven't been able to make sense of it no matter how many times I read it. I actually cut it out of her resume and have it sitting on my desk some 15 years later. In short, she was a lazy liar. Hiring a business intelligence analyst? There are a great variety of ways to get into this profession. I'm open to many of them. Frankly, if you have a good head on your shoulders and know even basic SQL, I can probably work with you, though lately I've had to get more picky as our projects have become more complex. This woman is mid-40s, boisterous personality, and seems like she'd be a good organizational fit. The problem is, she keeps lying, but only halfway. So, do you know SQL? Oh yes, I have years of experience with it. Great, so take a look at this code. This is the sort of thing we need to do. What's this? For some reason though, the most egregious lie that stands out in my head with her was when she commented, when I suggested she not take a particular route to the train station because it was dark and potentially unsafe. Also, I was headed to the same station and did not wish to commute with her. She said that she had a black belt and practiced martial arts for years. Oh cool, what discipline? I don't remember. For frick's sake. We had a shortlisted candidate come up for a campus interview. This usually includes a meeting with the dean, a long interview with the full hiring committee, a formal meeting with the department chair, dinner with the hiring committee, a formal job talk, a 1-hour academic lecture, teaching a simple undergrad course and meeting some students, as well as a campus tour. During the job talk, he kept flashing the pink satin liner of his suit jacket in the direction of one of our openly gay grad students. Everyone noticed. Later, he proceeded to get trashed during the meet and greet with the students at a local bar and confided all of the dirt about his current department and overshared the status of his rocky relationship with a grad student back in his home university, which was a big no-no even though it happens sometimes. The next morning sealed the big fat no. A grad student usually volunteers and is compensated to drive the candidate back to the airport. This person kept trying to persuade the openly gay grad student to drive him instead, even though another student, female, already had the task assigned to her. You know, this guy didn't get an offer. I'll never understand being so confident about this kind of thing that you would go into a really important recruiting situation and behave like this. Honestly, if I'm ever flown out of somewhere for any kind of work, be it interview or otherwise, that's me on high alert and vigilant for the entire journey, apart from maybe weekends. You just can't risk something like that. And yes, it's exhausting. When she listed all of her ex-boyfriends that currently worked there and said she couldn't wait to see the looks on their faces when she showed up to work. This was in the first 3 minutes of the interview, so I wasn't even close to offering her the job yet. I cut the interview right there and sent her on her way. You didn't invite her back for a second interview by a panel of her ex-boyfriends? How did you resist? Honestly, the thought crossed my mind, and in that office it would have been widely appreciated. I set up an interview for an acquaintance's nephew, with the company looking to hire 30 college students for summer work. The nephew's major and the line of work this company performed seemed to mesh perfectly, and I knew the hiring manager personally, so it seemed like a great fit. A couple of weeks later, the acquaintance emails asking about the job. So I hit up my hiring manager friend, and the conversation went something like this. So, how did the round of hiring go? HR said, "Great, needed to fill 30 spaces and only had to do 31 interviews to fill them." Oh, cool. So was Paul one of them? Oh, him. Yeah. Well, he was undressed during the interview, so we declined. What? Are you serious? I find it hard to believe he'd show up to an interview undressed. Well, it was a Skype interview, and when we brought up his video feed, he was lying in bed in the buck. Well, maybe he thought you couldn't see him? Maybe he thought it was an audio meeting? We told him we could see him, and he said, "Sorry," and then covered himself up with a sheet. We asked if he wanted to reschedule, and he said no, he was good. So, yeah, we decided to pass. Sorry, Paul. I've had 2 separate cases where people were so confident that they had the job that they botched the interview. On one of these, I wanted to tell the candidate to go out and come back again because he was one of two very good choices and his arrogance put my team off. They thought the other candidate would be a better fit. I've learned this is really important. I beat out a woman for a position who had literally decades of experience on me because no one got along with her. All my coworkers went to our boss and asked her to please not hire the other woman because she's so hard to deal with, even in small doses. They couldn't imagine having her around every day for 8 hours, and our boss listened, I guess, because here I am. I was performing a video interview with a candidate. They were clearly in a large bedroom with most of it visible in the background, but it was clean so I didn't mind. In the back right corner was a closed door. About 7 minutes into the interview, I see the door open slightly and some guy poke his head in, see that his roommate or girlfriend was in an interview and then close the door. Not a big deal, it happens. I asked my next question and let the candidate respond. But then about 30 seconds later, I see the door slowly open again, only this time the guy comes crawling out of the bottom. He continues to crawl across the floor, making his way to the opposite side of the room. I assume he thought he was out of the camera's field of view, but he was clearly visible. He gets to the far end of the room and turns to fiddle with something, butt in the air facing the camera. Finally, he finishes with whatever he was doing and makes his way back and out of the door. I know I should have stopped the candidate and had her deal with the guy, but it was so funny to watch that I had to let it play out. I could barely contain my laughter, and after the interview finished, I lost it. She got the job though, and from what I remember, she was a great employee. Eventually, we did bring it up in the break room. She confessed that she knew what was happening, and she could see the guy on her camera. She was so mortified and embarrassed, but wasn't sure how to react in the moment, so she just ignored it and answered the question. I told her it was one of the most hilarious things I'd seen in an interview. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Hiring for a customer support role. Explained to the candidate on pre-interview email how she'd need to sign in at our reception kiosk and register herself, get a name tag sorted, and then the hiring manager, me, would be informed and would come out to the lobby to get her. 15 minutes before interview time, I hear a god almighty jangly noise and see a woman repeatedly trying to open the locked door, and at one point uses her hands to beat the door and wave at people inside. And find out she's the candidate we're meant to interview and she never read the instructions. She lost out on the role there and then, but we still met her for about 10 minutes. We interviewed 3 other people that day and none had problems with interview etiquette. The strangest ever was a man telling us all about his mum's Alzheimer's, talking crap about our company, and getting upset we didn't offer him the position on the spot. It was a wild ride beginning to end. I had someone show up in Daisy Dukes and cowboy boots for an office job at a 4-star hotel. The narrator has now looked up what Daisy Dukes are, and yes, I can now understand that showing up to a fancy hotel interview in a tied-up crop top and denim short shorts may not in fact have been what the establishment was looking for. The people at my last teaching job interview said more or less the same thing, funnily enough. We were looking for a sous chef that would be able to work and train for a few months and then eventually fill my shoes as CDC, as I was leaving in about 6 months' time. We were a big, very successful restaurant in a super competitive city and had a ton of applications and interviews. Most interviews for a chef position include a pretty informal chat with a hiring chef, the owner and the general manager, and a cooking and tasting portion, where the interviewee plans a meal of 5 or 6 dishes and serves them to the interviewers. One guy came in and killed the interview, and served incredible dish after incredible dish, but the owner didn't like him because the guy interviewing was tattooless and more than 50 years old, and he felt that this guy's age wasn't conducive to our hip, late-night vibe. Whatever, you do you, Jeff, you insufferable prick. The same owner calls me a few days later and tells me that he's found a guy that he wanted to poach from a small bistro just outside our town. The guy comes in and is super cool, fresh jacket, oozes confidence, and a ton of cooking tattoos. The owner is in love, and I'm hoping that this new guy is into overweight dudes with chef jackets that are 2 sizes too small. Before the interview, all candidates had to send over an ingredients list so that we could order any ingredients that they may need for the cooking portion of the interview. And this guy had requested some foie gras for a dish he said had been awarded time and again, a foie and lobster crepe. Didn't sound very good to me, but I was willing to give it a shot and see how it went. After the meeting, the guy went into our kitchen and started cooking. After about 10 minutes, we all hear the guy screaming at one of our prep cooks to slice him some chives. A few minutes after that, he brings out the app, which he says is his take on shrimp and grits, something that is already on our menu and that he says is better than ours. I point out a few things. The shrimp is overcooked, the grits are gluey, and the chives he was so stressed about weren't even on the plate. He tells me that the problem was that our prep cook didn't speak English, and that when he was chef, he'd make sure the entire back-of-house staff was fluent. Holy crap, warning bell number 1. After 2 more dismal dishes, he tells us that he's going to make his famous crepes. I'm freaking pumped because I know that it's going to be an absolute crap show. The guy is in the kitchen for at least 45 minutes, screaming, cursing, and throwing crap around. I go back into the kitchen to see what the guy is doing, and he's fiddling with the Vitamix, which looks like it's full of cork. I ask him what's going on, and he tells me he's just blending the crepe batter. I point out that crepe batter usually doesn't have the consistency of modeling clay, and he pretty much tells me to F off, and that this dish has won awards. I look over at his phone, which is out on the table, and see that there is a recipe from allrecipes.com for crepes pulled up. So not only does this guy not know how to make his signature dish, but he can't even follow a simple fricking recipe. He brings his dish out, and it's a fricking mess. Burned foie, rubbery lobster, broken béarnaise. The concept sucked, but the execution was somehow even worse. The crepe itself, though, was a culinary abomination. It was as if someone had given a lump of grey Play-Doh a pap smear. I straight up told him this was one of the worst things I'd seen produced in a kitchen, and he pushed back, saying that it would have been great if my staff had given him the support he needed. Despite my protests, we actually hired this guy. The owner thought that he was cool and projected the kind of image we needed. He lasted about a month before I threw his butt out of my kitchen, which the owner never forgave me for. I called the old guy that killed the interview and offered him the job, and he essentially told me to get bent, because he knew he deserved the job in the first place, and he was right. To start the interview, I asked him to tell us, 3 people, a little bit about himself. 35 minutes later, he stopped talking. Usually people answer this question in 1 to 5 minutes. It was incredibly awkward and I was tempted to interrupt him, but then truly wanted to see how long he'd go on. We have a very simple pre-employment test. If you've been in our industry for more than a year, you should get 100%. Sometimes we even give it as a take-home test. We had one guy that took his test home and had it for over a week. He brought it to the formal interview and got 90% of the questions wrong, even though according to his resume he was an all-star and knew everything. He had an excuse for every wrong answer to even the most widely known questions in our industry. It would be the equivalent of saying you'd been laying sod for 20 years and then put the green side down. He didn't get the job. I did a phone interview with the guy and he seemed really excited and very friendly. He seemed to be relatively new to the field, but we were willing to give him a chance. I invited him to come in for an in-person interview. My manager and I were doing this second interview, and when I called him in, he gave me a huge hug and proceeded to talk to me like I was his best friend. As a 27-year-old woman, I was incredibly uncomfortable and froze up. At the end of the interview, we told him we'd reach out to him within a couple of weeks to let him know the outcome. After the interview, my manager asked if I knew him, and I said definitely I did not. His interview was not great either, and he was not a good fit for the job. He proceeded to call my phone every day that week and left me long voicemails. Most of the times he'd ask about his interview, but sometimes he'd say things like, "Hey girl, how are things going? I was thinking if I get hired, we should hang out." It freaked me out, and I had my manager call him early to give him the news that he didn't get the job. The calls didn't stop, and I just kept deleting his voicemails without listening. My manager and I were so disturbed by his persistence that we went to HR for help, and they must have done something because the calls stopped after that. Yuck, that's a boundary problem in every sense of the word and an office creep just waiting to happen. It's an impressive enough problem that HR had to get involved with a party that didn't even technically work there. I was the interviewee. I wasn't feeling well that morning, but I had an interview with a super cool science museum as a promotions event coordinator. It would have been the perfect job. I decided to go to the interview anyway. As I drove to the interview, I felt horrible. When I went inside, I was feeling worse. I was asked to sit and wait for the hiring manager to come and get me. When she finally did, I knew I'd made a mistake in coming in. I got up and followed her across the whole museum up 2 flights of stairs. It felt like it was 120 degrees in there. And finally, as we were walking toward her office and she reached for the door handle, my stomach let go. I barely made it to the trash can right next to me and proceeded to hurl for a good 2 minutes, even dry heaving a few times. When I was finished, I looked up and she had her back to me with her head in her hands, like she was trying to hold it together. I said I was sorry and I hoped she had a better day than me, and I turned around and left. Man, that would have been a fun job. Hiring for an apartment building doorman. He kept telling me that he was just on the phone with Hong Kong putting together a currency exchange transaction and that he was working on another big thing in China. He asked me to wait a few minutes while he finished typing an email. Told me that he was always on the phone. We didn't hire him. I have 2 stories. The first is back in college days. We were interviewing for a new college newspaper reporter. The question was, this position requires an energetic, inquisitive, outgoing person who can chase a story and get the facts. With that in mind, how would you describe yourself? The answer was, fun? Do you care to elaborate on that? No. They didn't get the position. The second story was someone applying for an IT position in my later career. An individual that had been fired from one branch of a government agency decided to apply for another branch a few years later. But his resume read very much differently than the reality. Instead of him being fired for essentially not knowing how to do his primary job function, he was now let go when the project closed, 3 years after he was fired. Also, all of his resume achievements listed for that time were things either myself or one of my co-workers had accomplished, things that he didn't even have any involvement with. I guess he didn't realize we were on the hiring panel because we'd merged with another region. I honestly don't fathom how he thought that was going to work out, because it was the same agency and it's not like we wouldn't have noticed. She cried 3 times during the interview about how much she hated her current job. My coworker had to get up and grab a box of tissues for her. When she finally calmed down, she informed us that she'll need a special desk chair due to an injury she sustained at her current job. And yes, she did have a workers' compensation court case against said job, and she hoped to win big. No one had said anything about hiring her, she just made an assumption that she got the job, I guess. The icing on the cake was that she was interviewing for a workers' compensation job at a firm where we only represent employers, never injured people. While that doesn't influence hiring decisions, talking at length about her current case against her boss was a weird thing to bring up. That and crying. I'm pretty well acquainted with employment and comp law. She didn't get turned down because she had a comp case. Crying 3 times, believe it or not, did the trick of taking her off the callback list. I felt really bad for her, but dude, you can't do that in an interview. I hire student university workers. One of my questions is, tell me about a time at work where you made a mistake and how you fixed it. This kid had no prior work experience, so I modified the question to remove the at work part. I thought he'd tell me about messing up at school or at home. Nope. He told me about the time where he'd ripped his pants in gym class in the 4th grade. He didn't tell me how he fixed the situation either, so I'm assuming his pants are ripped to this day. This kid was a goldmine of what not to do in an interview, to be honest. He didn't get the job. What stupid self-inflicted injuries have you seen that could have been easily avoided? I was a firefighter and we were called to a vehicle fire at midnight in a rural area. We get there and sure enough there's a pickup truck fully engulfed in flames. This wasn't the usual engine compartment fire. The whole truck was roaring. I was the nozzle man at the time on my engine, which meant my job was to be the guy spraying water on the fire. As I got closer to the pickup, I noticed a gosh-awful smell. I was relatively new, so I couldn't place it, but I just knew it was putrid. My heart immediately sank when I remembered there was a missing girl case in our area. People often stash evidence inside cars and then burn the whole thing to get rid of the evidence. Guns, clothes, even bodies. As I'm putting out the fire, I'm dreading what I'll find. Something was in the truck bed. The fact that the truck's owner wasn't on the scene made me more nervous. Fast forward and the fire's out. Turns out the truck bed was filled with a dozen pumpkins. Thankfully, no bodies. But we had no idea where the driver was. A few days later, we heard from the cops that just before we showed up at the fire, a lone guy arrived at the ER with massive, full-body burns. Turns out that as this guy was driving his pumpkins to a nearby farmer's market, he hit something in the road. His gas gauge went to empty and he smelled gas coming from his truck. The hero of this story crawled under his truck to assess the damage and used the only light source he had, a Bic lighter. Someone saw the fire and drove him to the ER. Some separate passerby was the one who actually called in the fire. In short, if you think you have a gas leak, don't use your lighter as your light source. Can't decide, so I'll take 2. Worst injuries: the bikers who thought going 300 kilometers an hour on the German Autobahn was a good idea because it's legal. Those ones are too far gone to even be organ donors, at least for the larger parts. The stupidest: The guy who climbed a fence to sneak into an open-air concert. His engagement ring got caught on the top of the chain-link fence when he jumped down, which degloved his finger and part of his hand. It was past 10 p.m., so the gates were open and entrance was free. Pedestrian versus train is always like a bomb went off. My colleague found an enucleated eyeball like half a mile down the track from the majority of the body. Apparently, it was her screensaver for a few years at work. The narrator can't really put his finger on why someone having a photo they took of an eyeball seems so much more sick and twisted a screensaver than, say, a picture that they'd found on Google, which honestly just seems kind of quirky. I guess it's the fact that you know the full tragic story and decided to go, "Okay, I want this on my screen," that seems so morbid. People are weird. Some guy decided kicking a running mower blade that was jammed up was a great idea. He was nice enough to bring his foot in to us, though, in a cooler full of beer. My boss's husband was mowing the lawn and then the blades jammed. Decided to unclog it with his bare hand. He only lost the tips of all his fingers. Too much work to turn it off. Besides, I can just get it out real quick and— oh my god, my hand! There was an SUV full of teenagers driving down the highway in busy traffic. They were driving pretty aggressively. They tried to pass a truck, but the truck is towing a trailer and can't slow down quickly enough to let them pass before oncoming traffic gets close. So they slow down and try to make a second pass. The 15-year-old in the back seat decides to pull his pants down and hang his butt out and moon the other car. Once they passed, they overcorrected and rolled. The kid doing the mooning was ejected and left half his brains and his left arm in a 75-foot line down the middle of the highway. I work in a hospital. There's a lot of stupid crap I've seen. Climbing things and falling off them is a big one. And skateboarding without helmets. I know helmets look embarrassing when skateboarding, but a guy came off his board and was in an induced coma for a week after cracking his head open, for frick's sake. My mom nearly died because she wasn't wearing a helmet while biking. Seeing my dad on his hands and knees, screaming desperately into my mom's ears, trying to wake her up, was the best helmet PSA that 5-year-old me ever got. I met a guy while I was in the hospital ER that was getting out after suffering a stab wound to his leg. I asked him what happened and he told me that his friend stabbed him with a carving knife. I asked him why he'd do something like that and he replied, "We were both drunk and decided to see if I could feel it." At least he had a sense of humor about it. My dad is a police officer, and in the first few weeks he was working, he had 2 really bad accident calls. The first one was on a local highway where a guy had lost control of his U-Haul and flipped it. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt and was ejected. He landed, most likely already dead, and the truck came to rest on his head. Only on his head. The other one was more gruesome. A homeless man was sleeping under garbage when a garbage truck drove onto him trying to get closer to the dumpster. I know this has been said many times, I think even in Deadpool, but he described it as if you ran over a tube of toothpaste. The top popped and the bottom was completely flat. My cousin is an EMT, and he said one of the nastiest scenes he came upon was a car accident in which the passenger had both her legs up on the dash. Airbags deployed, causing severe fractures on both of her ankles, and pushed her knees into her face, breaking her eye socket. He said she was fully conscious when he arrived and in incredible pain. If I remember correctly, she survived and was expected to make a full recovery. He has lots of crazy stories, mostly crystal and drunk drivers though. 25 years in the fire service. Pick one. A. Dropping your smack pipe onto your bed and burning off all your skin and flesh. B. Getting drunk and hitting a tree sideways with your Grand Cherokee so hard that the frame rails met on the other side. Oh, and not being identified for 4 days because all you had was a fake ID. And C. Stopping your truck on the side of the I-95 to pee at 2 a.m. Getting out on the traffic side and getting waffled by a truck. Seriously, fricking drunk drivers. Nothing beats getting out of bed at 1 a.m., spending 5 hours watching the Staties do their investigation, and then going to work on 2 hours sleep. Here's one from within the last year that I didn't have to deal with directly. Some butthole walked into traffic to self-delete at 5 a.m. on 95 in Greenwich, Connecticut. Got himself flattened, but the trucker didn't notice, and the traffic kept running over him until 9. I went over the smear around 6:30 and noticed the clothes everywhere. 4 hours of the NYC commuter rush drove over that guy's carcass. The smear was spread over 3 lanes and 100 yards. People are used to dead deer and some trash on the road. Plus it was early and very dark. A friend of mine told me about a call he had as an EMT. It was for a guy with an ungloved member in a hot tub. Firefighter here. Teenage boy ducked and rolled from a car traveling about 40 miles per hour because a bee got into the car and he was allergic to bees. Holy crap, this is really one of those, you shouldn't have to be struggling not to laugh when you hear this one, and I'm very, very sorry. I can't fault the kid for taking his chances and grazing the crap out of his skin, but surely at that point you freeze in fear and mutter through gritted teeth for the driver to please slow down so you can run for your life. I'm just saying that going from seated and belted to leaping bodily out of a moving vehicle is something that would run against my instinct, even if my allergy, an axe-wielding psychopath, was in the car. My dad was working on these kinds of things in the 1970s. One of the stories he told me was he was called to an early morning accident on the 101 where a drunk driver got an off-ramp and hit another car head-on. Neither the driver nor the passenger in the right-of-way car were wearing their seatbelts. The driver was impaled on the column of the steering wheel, and the passenger was launched through the windshield and then skid on his head, both dead at the scene. And the drunk driver? Totally fine since he was so drunk he basically went ragdoll on impact. A theatre was being renovated. The theatre was designed for a specific show, and that show left after something like a 15-year run. One of the design quirks of the theatre was a concrete basement underneath the stage, where machinery would push up some pretty impressive set changes from below. This meant that the stage had giant open holes in it after all that machinery and stuff was cleared out of the basement. The holes in the stage opened up to a 30-foot drop with bare concrete beneath. The crew who was tearing down the stuff on the stage took some precautions to make sure nobody fell into these holes. They put plywood over the holes and set up caution cones all around them. When they finished tearing down all the stuff from the stage, the last things remaining were those cones and plywood. Someone picked up all the cones, and it was our future patient's job to pick up the plywood. These were long sheets of plywood, too big just to throw over his shoulder. So he picked up one side of the plywood sheet and started walking forward, pushing it along the stage floor. He never even saw the hole he fell through because the plywood he was pushing blocked his view of his own feet. He fell 30 feet and tumbled on the way down, landing directly only on his outstretched hands. He had multiple nasty compound fractures in both arms. Luckily, the shattering bones of his arms broke a lot of the momentum, so when his head smashed down into the concrete, it wasn't going fast enough to kill him. It knocked him unconscious and knocked out all of his teeth on one side of his head. It also crushed and dislocated his jaw. The radial and ulnar fractures were the worst. His hands just hung limply, with gore everywhere and his bones clearly exposed on both forearms. He woke up while we were prepping him for ambulance transport. He mumbled something to us, but his speech was garbled and messed. Mostly due to his injury, but also due to the spinal immobilization we put on him, which tucks underneath the chin. He kept mumbling, After a while, I realized he was trying to tell us that his hands hurt. Which makes sense, considering the circumstances. He fell 30 feet onto concrete. He was damn lucky just to have survived. EMS supervisor of a well-known party campus. Of all the calls with completely blotto patients, the winner is a freshman who drank one beer and attempted to slide down the railing of his fourth-floor dorm's stairwell, only to fall 5 stories upside down onto the concrete basement floor, with only his head as a cushion. On arrival, the pool of blood, twice his size, gave me no hope when I reached down to check his pulse. To my surprise, he not only survived his ICU hospitalization, he sat next to me on the first day of organic chemistry a year later. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Thankfully, I didn't see it as our response was over the phone, but we got a call from a car that had done a rollover and no one was responding. So we got police out there ASAP. At some point, a bystander came to the car and said there was no one outside, which is weird because someone had to have been there at some point for it to crash, right? Well, about 10 minutes later, the bystander came back to say he'd found the driver, or at least half of him. We had to call the police back and let them know the driver was bisected at the waist. Later on, the bystander reported he found the torso as well. Bad day to be a good Samaritan for him, I think. Some of the other people in the office were speculating it was a murder cover-up, but he probably just didn't have his seatbelt on. If your car rolls over and half of you is flying out the window, that's something that happens. I was actually just thinking of this the other day. I know a family in my small town that recently lost their son in a car accident. The son and his girlfriend were just driving around late at night on the roads around their farm, and they've driven on them hundreds of times. They got talking or something after he missed a turn, having to swerve and tipping his truck over. He wasn't wearing his seatbelt, so he was thrown out of the window and smashed by the truck, killing him instantly. His girlfriend was wearing her seatbelt and didn't even have a scratch on her. The truck itself was totally drivable. It was kind of dented on the side that it was landed on, but a little buffing out and you wouldn't even know his car was in an accident. But he was killed. Moral of the story, wear your seatbelt. A lesson that the narrator has had thoroughly drilled into him after doing a bunch of these medical videos, and hopefully one that the rest of you will take to heart as well. That and doing any of the other things in these stories. My days of getting tipsy and climbing on things may be done. Responded to a young guy that fell out of the shower when he slipped. He impaled a wooden toilet plunger into the side of his chest underneath his armpit. It was literally halfway down the wood into his body. The guy was standing in the living room when we got there, plunger and all. How he was alive, I don't know. Our mouths were open after going into the home, had to put him sideways on the stretcher in a position of comfort. The poor guy had just been showering. I was skimming and I saw shower, slipped, and toilet plunger and was expecting it to have gone up his butt accidentally. But this was much worse than a colon puncture. I was at work, sitting there with my boss. This guy comes running into our office and cries for help, talking about his friend standing outside. We walk out and see another young man holding his hand covered in blood and missing 1.5 fingers. We of course help him, having a first aid kit and luckily my boss being well taught in first aid. He then got transported by helicopter. But the interesting thing is how he got the injury. Apparently, the guys were having a barbecue and took a circular saw to cut open their buns. I did this so often before, it never went wrong. I later learned they were able to save at least one of his fingers. The worst injury I've seen caused by something stupid was a man who crashed into a tree on the side of the highway. He had a nice gouge in his scalp and totaled his car. The reason he did this? He imagined the exit was about half a mile earlier than it was and tried to merge off into the grass. He was also high as frick on whippets. Really strange to find an entire box of NO2 canisters in someone's passenger seat and an empty whipped cream dispenser, which is the stupidest substance I can think of besides huffing paint. I nearly had a similar diversion from the I-75 through Atlanta when someone threw a glass bottle out of their window and it flew into mine and cracked me across the skull. Fortunately, it was late at night, so there was no traffic and I didn't hit anything when I lost control and spun out onto the shoulder. I had to get 5 stitches, and I've still got a nasty and very visible scar to this day. I missed one of those big steel poles that holds up street signs by about a foot, so yeah, someone else littering almost killed me. Not my story, but one that my paramedic dad has told me a couple of times. A lady was standing under a massive oak tree in her yard after a nasty storm damaged it. One of the limbs, as thick as a trunk on a normal street tree, was cracked and this lady was just staring up at it, trying to figure out what to do when it broke off and crushed her. Apparently it absolutely pancaked her torso and head, but left her limbs just fine. My dad describes it as exactly like a Bugs Bunny cartoon. Dudes too neglected, underfed, unneutered large pit bulls were fighting over the unspayed female dog. Dude stepped into the middle and had his bottom lip entirely removed to the gum line. He was also on a lot of blood thinners. He then pulled his concealed carry weapon and shot the dog, hitting it in the stomach. I felt so bad for that dog for being owned by a freaking moron. It's his fault the dog died. I picked the guy's lip up off the ground and packaged it for transport. He bled all the way to the level 1 trauma center an hour away. We ran out of absorbents and had to use QuickClot to get the bleeding stopped. Blood was running out the back of the ambulance. Former paramedic here, I saw a man lose his life after falling 12 feet. 12 feet ain't that high, but when you land wrong, instant death. If you work at any height, wear a harness. I always like to remind people the average human is just tall enough that if they stand up straight and fall rigidly forward or backwards onto solid cement, they will gain just enough energy to impart a likely lethal blow. Apply this to things like curbs or other small surfaces and it's no contest. That's how freaking fragile we are when it comes to gravity, people. My mother was a police explorer in the 80s. She later went on to being a 911 dispatcher. She had to do a ride-along as part of police explorers or dispatch training, I can't remember which. The town she lived in has lots of gravel roads. On a blistering and muggy Iowa summer, the ambulance gets called to a motorcycle crash. They'd been speeding down the gravel and he was wearing shorts, sandals, and no helmet. He was literally pasted across the gravel, which acted like sandpaper. His head was split wide open and his brains were scattered like a Gallagher show, and the smell is something my mum says she can still smell when she tells the story. Gently cooking brains in gravel mixed with the road dust and raw meat smell. Didn't help that it was super humid, too. The girl riding with him lost 80% of her skin and broke basically everything. She died in the hospital before her parents got there. My mum made me swear to never ride motorcycles. Riding leathers aren't a fricking fashion statement. So unless you want to force some traumatized 20-year-old to scrape your face meat off the road with a garden spade, wear the proper riding gear and helmet. I'm a medic. A kid de-skinned his sausage while peeing by aggressively pulling his zipper up after he was finished. Oh god. Excuse the narrator, he's just going to narrate with his legs crossed and try not to think about the immense amount of second-hand pain that reading, writing, and narrating that last sentence caused him. Owie, 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 owie. My father-in-law is a firefighter, but the area mostly just has car accidents. So many people have their lives ruined by speeding or driving drunk. So many. I'm a cop. About 4:45 in the morning, we get a call of a burglary in progress. Now, we get off at 6:30 and have a whole night of paperwork to do right before we go home, so we weren't exactly stoked to do this. Anyways, I get there first, and the two occupants come running out and say a guy was trying to break in and smashed a window to do it. So they ran. I'm thinking active burglary in progress, so I get my buddy rolling code 3 in case this turns sideways. We get the house surrounded and decide, well, screw it, we've got to approach somehow. We look through the fence and see what looks like a person laying on the ground. We make entry into the backyard and sure enough, there's a person laying on the ground right by the rear door. Only now we can also see the shattered glass and massive amounts of blood. We push into the backyard and the guy is clearly dead. Medics on scene confirm it. After further inspection, we realize that this clown broke the window and sliced his arm deep, right where your bicep meets your forearm. He then walked from that location to the rear door and tried to enter there for a long time by how much blood was pooled on the ground and on the door. He ended up dying, face up, spread-eagled right by the door. The homeowners had no idea who he was. I ended up going home before the whole thing was wrapped up and I never got confirmation as to anything. But our best guess was that this knucklehead was so high on crystal that he thought that this house was his and ended up smashing the window trying to get in when he couldn't open the door. He cut himself and just died. 911 call for a guy with abdominal pain. We find out the guy had shoved an egg up his butt for bedroom reasons. After he'd concluded his act of self-love, he couldn't extract the egg. He grabbed a spoon and tried to break the egg to get it out. This really happened. The guy just cut himself up real bad trying to get in there and eventually died from complications. A guy wanted to see what a ring on his eggplant felt like, so he used his wedding ring. Couldn't get it off and was ashamed to ask for help until it started turning black and blue and was in extreme pain. Either dude has giant hands or a gosh darn spaghetti wang. I'm not a first responder, but this reminds me of that one YouTuber that stuck his head in a microwave and then filled it with cement. Like literally, what did he expect? Did he even know how cement works? That it hardens? Anyways, it was a waste of time for the first responders in my opinion. Had that guy been smarter, the first responders could have actually saved a life of someone who actually needed help rather than someone who self-inflicted this idiocy upon themselves. Personally, speaking as a stupid person, I nearly cut a chunk out of my hand because I was cutting carrots on a mandolin without using the guard. I still have the scar and I haven't touched the darn thing since. What's the rarest disease you've seen a patient correctly self-diagnose? Subarachnoid hemorrhage. My guy straight up walked up to the desk and said, "I've got a headache out of nowhere. I think it's one of those spider hemorrhage things." We didn't take him seriously until the CT scan came back. To be fair, he was walking fine, talking fine, and didn't have any light sensitivity. Said the pain was a 5 out of 10. The guy could just handle pain really well. Because I have some people asking, we ended up transporting him to another hospital. We were small and not equipped for all that. We took him via ambulance to a larger hospital and was met outside the ambulance bay and he was taken directly to the surgery unit. I saw him like 6 months later in a store and he had a bit of a stutter. I would say that it was the allergy to meat after being bitten by a Lone Star tick. It was a young kid, maybe 8 to 9 years old. He would only eat tacos per the mom's instructions. He had tacos that night and had no other foods that day out of the norm, nor new medicines, lotions, detergents, shampoos in his routine. He had urticaria, hives, up and down his arms. Mum did recently remember pulling a tick that didn't look like a deer nor dog tick out of him and felt it looked like a Lone Star tick. I had no better diagnosis for the lady and referred her son to an allergist. I'd never heard of this allergy before the mum told me about it. I worked at a pediatric clinic and we had a mum properly diagnose her 9-month-old baby with Tay-Sachs disease. He wasn't progressing developmentally and ended up passing away at 18 months old. I'm actually very freaking jealous of all these doctors whose patients are helping out with the diagnosis. Mine are all just saying, "I have chest pain in my toe when I go number 2. I had an 11-year-old girl who didn't move her bowels for a week. A week! Told me she thought it was her girl parts that weren't working properly. After a full workup and finally a CT scan of her abdomen and pelvis, which I hate doing on kids because of the level of radiation, I found out her uterus was so full of blood it was causing full-on bowel obstruction. Her girl bits were so imporforate or closed up that she couldn't menstruate and all the blood just stayed in her uterus. She required an emergency hymenectomy and was sent home the next day. Hot damn if she didn't call it from the get-go. Scurvy. Why he didn't just start eating foods with vitamin C, I'll never know. That was right up there with diseases that I just didn't think people got anymore. The old pirate disease. Classic. Just goes to show you that some kids do not want to eat their fruits and vegetables, and some parents sadly can't be bothered making them do so. Although the replies to this story were full of college-age students actually getting the same disease from only eating cup noodles, so I guess it could just be a really irresponsible adult as well. When my oldest was born, he peeled a little, like babies may do, but it kept getting worse and he was flaky and had scales. The pediatrician told me he had dry skin and to lotion him up. Dr. Google claimed it was a condition called ichthyosis, but that was super rare, so no one believed me. Anyways, fast forward 6 months and a referral to a dermatologist later, and he's got ichthyosis. Also, after my first was born, I had excruciating pain just under my ribcage, mostly after I ate. Tums did nothing. Gas X did nothing. Did a little Googling and it sounded like gallbladder attacks, only it's on the wrong side. I go to my GP, get an ultrasound. My gallbladder was full of stones. Got a referral to a surgeon who dragged me for a month claiming it couldn't be my gallbladder, the pain was on the wrong side. Meanwhile, I was having attacks after every meal and stopped eating except ginger ale and club crackers. I lost over 10 pounds. Call the surgeon daily in tears. Finally, he agrees to operate, but right before the procedure tells me that once my gallbladder is gone, I'll still have problems. Woke up from surgery and found out my gallbladder was worse than they thought, so it needed to come out anyway. 2.5 years later and I haven't had any more attacks. Guess it was my gallbladder after all. Bird mite infestation. The lady wasn't taken seriously at first and came off as a psycho. Nope, the birds built a nest in her AC ductwork. Patient here. Self-diagnosed a still unknown fungal infection inside both eyes. It took making them glow with a rock lamp to get attention. Kept seeing strands in both eyes, then wow, that UV lamp. Ended up on one heck of a cocktail to save my sight. Kids, don't wash your eyes with river water in a tropical rainforest. Just say no. A nurse friend brought her newborn to the pediatrician in '63 and told him her son had Wilms tumor. The guy blew her off and told her she was a nervous mother and a little bossy boots. The kid was starting to crump when a pediatric oncology guy noticed and saved the baby. My friend dumped the pediatrician. A patient turned up clutching some internet printouts about visceral leishmaniasis. Luckily, I managed to resist saying anything sarcastic as that's exactly what she had. I appreciate it's not uncommon worldwide, but in UK hospitals it's pretty damn rare. And I was grateful for the printouts, it saved me a lot of searching. As a physician and a med school doctor, it's pretty distressing to read all of these. I told the doctor I had, enter the fairly common disease and typical symptoms here, but he or she didn't believe me. We teach our med students to ask the patients if they have any idea what they may have. Doctors need to take the patient's opinions seriously. Much of the time, the patient has already spent hours researching the disease and may have some experience with it, especially if it's a familial disease. I may require my students to listen to these stories. I'm not a medical worker, but my grandmother self-diagnosed herself with Chiari. She had been having problems and everyone in the family tried to tell her it was nothing. She ended up needing brain surgery and still suffers from it. I had a resident tell me a patient was in the ER saying he had a worm in his eye. Why does he think that? I asked. Because he feels something in his eye. I patiently explained to the resident that often people have a speck of dust, so you just have to look carefully all around the eyelids under the slit lamp, which has a microscope. As I was talking and examining the patient, lo and behold, a worm wriggled right under the surface and I jumped back and nearly fell off my chair. It turns out the patient was visiting from Africa and his father was a veterinarian, who told him to come to the hospital to take the worm out. These parasites are common in Africa, not so much in the US. The entire infectious disease department was very excited. Years ago, a woman who'd been taking calcium supplements made from ground horse bones diagnosed herself with lead poisoning. I recall she was a movie actress. Impressive in that I think none of her doctors saw this, and there was at the time no reason to believe that a calcium supplement would have a lot of lead in it. But of course animals store lead in their bones, and until leaded gasoline was phased out, every animal pretty much was getting very high exposure. I have to add an editorial comment about lead and mercury. The counter-argument I've heard when I expressed concerns about exposure from fish and gasoline is that, "You're gonna die anyway, you could be hit by a bus." I'm puzzled to the point of anger by such stupid responses. Is the argument since you can be hit by a bus, you should not try to avoid being poisoned? Especially since the result of neurological damage is not sudden death or even death at all, but rather a sometimes hideous diminution of quality of life. Who would say, sure, take off 10 IQ points, I might be hit by a bus? Sure, that makes sense. 5th-year med student here, diagnosed myself with lymphoma. Everyone thought I was being a classic paranoid med student, but it turns out I was right. Finished chemo 2 weeks ago. I would imagine that just simply learning of all these completely horrifying ailments could make anyone a hypochondriac. Good on you for staving off the self-doubt and working out what was really going on. Not particularly rare, but I had a guy diagnose himself with Guillain-Barré syndrome and a lady diagnose herself with Charcot-Marie tooth disease. I worked in a health department for a while looking at infectious diseases. 2 things seemed constant. 1. The vets are really good at self-diagnosing zoonotic diseases. 2. Their doctors rarely believe them. In my time, we saw 2 uncommon diseases: psittacosis and tularemia. Vets are well trained anyway, but to be fair, it's a pretty obvious leap from "I treated a dog with X" to "oh, now I have X too." The psittacosis was from some kind of exotic bird and had infected the owner. The owner had already had a cough when visiting the clinic, and the vet recommended that the owner see her GP. But the GP refused to order the tests until the patient was extremely sick. If I recall correctly, the lady survived, but a lawsuit came from the ordeal. No idea how it ended. Bird survived too, I believe. A different vet herself got tularemia, treating a stray cat that was brought into the clinic. To be fair, it's very rare in cats as well. The cat sadly died despite treatment. The vet's GP was not convinced she could have contracted the disease so quickly. The health department had to intervene and insist the vet get treatment. I honestly have no idea why anyone would flat out deny the possibility when a known exposure is present. ER physician here. I once had a patient, a middle-aged man, who self-diagnosed a glioblastoma multiforme. It turns out he'd been having headaches, nausea, blurry vision for about 6 months. He didn't seek medical help until a couple of weeks before I'd seen him. At first he was treated with simple NSAIDs and rest, but was ordered a full set of tests. Between visits to his primary care physician, he saw an episode of the television series ER, where one of the characters had similar symptoms and was diagnosed with glioblastoma multiforme. So when he came to the ER, because he developed dysarthria and a persistent headache, he bluntly said he might have this particular disease. Obviously, I didn't believe him since glioblastomas are not very common and television is fantasy. Well, after the MRI scan showed it had that particular brain cancer, I couldn't help but marvel at his self-diagnosis. But deep down, I wish he was completely wrong, because glioblastoma multiforme is one of the most aggressive brain cancers there is, with an extremely low survival rate. When I told him about his diagnosis, he didn't get angry or sad, just said it was okay. He knew it all along and was at peace with his immediate future. I followed up on him for some time and he died 3 months after my visit. It was one of those weird circumstances that, in my line of work, makes you think that there's something bigger than us all around us. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a patient who correctly diagnosed herself with mastitis, although she was very worried that she had had an inflammatory carcinoma of the chest. To be fair, they can look similar. Another time, I had a patient correctly diagnose a lump in her breast as a fibroadenoma. I was very impressed. Man, I got a giant abscess, and everyone kept coming to look at this giant, pus, blood-filled bubble on my chest. No one had ever seen mastitis go this wrong before. Stupid family doctor made me suffer and ignored me for ages until I ended up in the ER. The nurse admitting me was like, "How long has this been going on?" To be fair, it only grew and became crazy that morning, but the lump I had would not go away no matter what I tried. Is it just me, or are doctors sometimes like, "A totally abnormal thing going on with your body? Let's run some tests." Unless it's on a lady's part, in which case it's just a lady mystery. Probably hysteria. Oh, it's not just you. They've done all kinds of studies. I went into the ER in severe pain and was sure it was kidney stones. I told the nurse that and got a long lecture on how I do not self-diagnose, just tell the doctors my symptoms and let him figure it out because he's the professional. The doctor comes in, I describe my symptoms, leaving off my ideas on the matter, and they do some blood and pee tests. The doctor comes back and it turns out I did have kidney stones. I looked at the nurse, who happened to be in the same room at the time, and she just huffed and walked out. The doctor looked confused and I told him the whole story. He laughed and said something to the effect of course patients should tell me what they think the issue is and why. I may not come to the same conclusion as you, but every bit of data helps. Not quite the same, but this was so creepy and sad I had to share. One of my dad's co-workers went to pick up a patient with the ambulance, and they started talking during the drive to the hospital. The patient told the co-worker that he had a very special type of cancer, and started listing his symptoms. Co-worker thought to himself, well crap, this sounds like a lot of the issues I've been having, and decided to get himself checked out. It turns out he had the exact same type of disease, and died a few months later. Damn sad that even catching it ahead of time didn't help the guy in question here. I don't even know if it's silver lining that they got a few months to sort out their estate. Honestly, I'd rather not know and then cark it one day without living in dread, but maybe it wouldn't have been that simple either. It's not rare or a disease, but it always terrifies me when a patient says they're going to die and then later actually freaking dies. We had a girl say this and then later die from a PE. She was young too. Just so we're clear, this girl died within 45 minutes of predicting said death. She was unloaded from the gurney after being brought into the ER for difficulty breathing and started complaining of back pain once on the bed that was brand new for her. Then 45 minutes or so later, we pronounced her time of death. The nurse was traumatized because this young girl said it with such conviction. We later found out this girl was on birth control pills and figured it was the reason she threw a clot. Sad day, man. I should probably leave this here. How often do blood clots occur? Blood clots are generally rare but sometimes occur in otherwise healthy people, even those not taking CHCs. Between 1 and 5 of every 10,000 women who are not pregnant and not using CHCs will experience a blood clot in any given year. This number increases slightly if the person uses CHCs. Between 3 and 9 of every 10,000 CHC users will experience a blood clot in any given year. This girl might have had a bunch of other risk factors for a PE as well. Possible long periods of immobilization, recent surgery, trauma, who knows. The only risk factor I caught wind of was birth control pills. It's something providers in the ER typically ask about if a female comes in complaining of dyspnea with no history of respiratory problems. I work in pain management and a lady had symptoms that other doctors didn't believe. She was labeled as a substance addict or someone seeking narcotics. She came to our office in tears, just telling me she felt pain in random places of her body with no abnormal imaging or other symptoms. She stated several times that she felt she had something inexplicably wrong with her and that she wasn't lying for pills. We discovered she has a very rare case of chronic regional pain syndrome, more severe than any other case we'd seen. Sadly, there's no cure, but at least she has an explanation as to why she has pain for no evident reason. Not a medical worker, but I am a rare case of WebMD being right about cancer. Felt a lump in my throat for upwards of a year and a half, but doctors kept telling me it was in my head. They stuck cameras down my throat and nothing. It took an ultrasound after giving myself up and my PCP saying my thyroid felt slightly enlarged for a doctor to find it. One ultrasound and a biopsy later, they found out I had stage 2 papillary thyroid cancer that metastasized to 18 lymph nodes. Myself with lupus. Been having issues with chest pain and a myriad of other symptoms that never made sense together. GPs don't want to look at the mountain of records they have for you, just the problem at hand. All tests for a diagnosis came back in normal parameters, but I insisted on a fail-safe I'd read about. I asked to be tested for syphilis. But you have no symptoms for that. I know! It's because lupus will show as a false positive on that. Done, and I have lupus. I also diagnosed myself with lupus. Went to 2 doctors and they didn't believe me. I was 16 and they claimed I had the teenage blues or it was anemia symptoms. Finally went to a 3rd doctor when I couldn't go on feeling like crap any longer. Turns out I was in stage 4 kidney failure from lupus and they were like, yeah, you need to see a rheumatologist tomorrow. Pyloric stenosis. A couple brought in their little one with exorcist-type projectile vomiting. Exam and ultrasound confirmed the diagnosis. My daughter had this. I didn't diagnose it though. The doctors kept telling me there was nothing wrong with her and she was just spitting up, even though she couldn't keep anything down. I finally took her for a 3rd opinion and there it was. The doctor said the other ones probably didn't diagnose it because it's rare for girls to have it. She had surgery the next morning and she's fine now 15 years later. Found out later that a bunch of relatives, all girls, have had this. My older brother is developmentally disabled. For the longest time, all the psychologists and school counselors said he was ADHD and had some learning disabilities that he may have obtained in utero. My badass mum, with only a high school diploma, never really accepted that this was all that was going on with him, but listened to the doctors anyway. Fast forward to when my brother was 10 years old and my mother read an article about Fragile X syndrome. She happened to read about a rare form of it called Frax-E. The article perfectly described my brother's condition. My mother then decided to talk to a genetic counselor about getting my brother tested. The genetic counselor kind of scoffed at her diagnosis but went along with it anyways. Lo and behold, my brother had the exact form of Fragile X she had read about. My mum not only diagnosed my brother, but she also found out that our family was a carrier for Frax-E. It turned out my mum was a carrier and my grandpa had Frax-E. It was amazing because all my grandpa's life he fought with feelings of inadequacy because school and learning new things were really hard for him. He was held back 3 times in high school. When he found out there was a legitimate medical reason for this, it completely changed his outlook. We had a 20-year-old patient come into the hospital because his girlfriend was laying on his chest and told him his heartbeat was a little fast and sounded weird. He came in and said he had an irregular heartbeat or arrhythmia. According to his Google research, he said he may have AFib. He was correct. While watching a documentary about Asperger's during class, I had a portent and slow realization that what they talked about was disturbingly accurate on a personal level. After running through some screenings, months later, because diagnosis screenings are far more focused on children than adults, the doctors were wondering how it managed to be undetected during my childhood. I actually think a lot of people who are on the spectrum on some level probably go through life completely unaware of it, just due to a lot of pressure while growing up to repress or ignore their more neurodivergent tendencies rather than diagnose and treat them. And it was even worse for the people before our generation too. Not really a rare disease, but when I worked in the district hospital, I had a patient who came in for a 3-day fever saying that she might have hepatitis A because she had some shellfish over the weekend. She had no other symptoms. I laughed it off. Her full blood count did seem to indicate a viral infection, but I was thinking of dengue, which is a very common thing in that area, or just your run-of-the-mill viral fever. Fearing the former, I scheduled her to come on Saturday, 3 days later, to review her dengue antibodies test result. It so happened that I was working half-day that Saturday. It so happened the lady was yellow on that Saturday, jaundiced from the hepatitis, and the IgM came back negative. Boy, was I humbled. She was hospitalized in a tertiary center and came for a follow-up a few weeks after, and she was fit as a horse. I knew a guy who diagnosed himself with appendicitis within 1.5 hours of the symptoms appearing. It was very impressive for someone with no medical expertise. Rarest diseases are often easier to self-diagnose than medically diagnose, as the patient will jump to the worst conclusion with no data, and the doctor will start at the most likely and test down from there. I had a guy come in one night and diagnose himself with a broken tibia. Wasn't as impressive as it sounds as it was sticking through his skin. I correctly self-diagnosed my hypochondria. I diagnosed myself with a condition called hidradenitis suppurativa. I've struggled with it for 25 years. Been to several doctors who just threw a 2-week antibiotic at me and told me to come back if it returned. When I asked why I was having one of these flare-ups, they usually just shrugged and said I was just one of those people who were prone. I was never given a diagnosis. I started really looking into it about a year ago and went to a new doctor where I explained in detail why I believed I had the condition. After examining me, she agreed and has been wonderful in helping me treat this, with practical remedies and an open mind and listening ear. So glad that I found her. I self-diagnosed myself with allergy to carrot antifreeze protein. For some years, after eating raw carrots or having fresh carrot juice from the fridge, I was experiencing a tingling sensation in the throat and I could feel it swelling. At some point I realized I was allergic to carrots, but only to the raw ones. The weird thing was that this wasn't always the case. I sometimes had raw carrots and had no symptoms at all. The cooked ones were fine. Then about 8 to 10 years ago, I watched a program in which they mentioned that carrots can produce a natural and at the time, only plant antifreeze protein. Carrots make it in response to excessive cold. They also said that some people may be allergic to it. This protein is also broken down while carrots are cooked. This struck me as, that's it! So I did some tests. I can happily eat raw carrots that have been pulled out of the ground with no symptoms. However, raw carrots that have been in the fridge for some time will give me narrowed and itchy throat. What is the most disturbing thing you've overheard a parent tell their kid? Heard someone get really mad at their kid, who was 7 or 8, in the grocery store, and they screamed, "This is why your dog ran away. He hated you." Like, geez, lady, chill. I wish you were never born. In a grocery store after a small child was acting up. I was leaning against a telephone pole at a bus stop, just waiting for a friend to meet me there and then walk to my place. A woman and a little girl were sitting at the stop when a car pulled up. The lady stands up and looks at the little girl and says, "If I'm not back in an hour, call your grandma and tell her I said for both of you to get out of this town and disappear." Then she got in the car and it drove off as my friend came around the corner. I dated a girl in high school who was adopted. One day I was at the mall with her and her mother when they started fighting and her mother yelled, "Well, now I know why your mother put you up for adoption." It was pretty much the worst thing I've ever heard. This guy I dated had an adopted sister and his mum said the same stuff. She called her a little hussy as well. I was helping my dad fix one of his rentals. The toilet was plugged up and we found out that it was clogged with numerous action figures. My dad asked the renter's child if he was the one who put them in the toilet. To my surprise, he admitted it completely and apologized. Immediately, the renter dragged her kid by the arm into another room. We could hear everything said, which should have been obvious to her. She said, "Don't you ever betray you or yours again. If someone asks you if you did something like that, you say no. You understand me?" Ugh. Not me, but my mother. At the elementary school we worked at, there was one mother who constantly bullied her son, including pinching him over the slightest things, blatantly favoring his siblings over him, and making him walk to school in the rain. My mum reminisced how she rarely saw the kid being happy. One afternoon during my mum's parent and bus pickup duties, she observed the kid's mum picking him up from school and yelling at him. As usual. Through tears, he asked his mum why he couldn't just go live with his dad. "Then you don't even have to see me anymore. Why can't I go stay with Daddy?" And her answer? "Because he wants you," before slamming the door and driving off. I still don't understand how that woman never lost custody of him. Out of all my children, you are the biggest disappointment. Oof. I sincerely hope you are listening to Lucille Bluth, because that's the only person with whom that statement has any chance of being remotely funny from. And even then, only if she was talking to Job. But seriously, that's freaking tragic and probably broke a kid. Not really public, but when I was in high school, I was at my best friend's house hanging out. He got in an argument with his mum and she got so teed off that she said, "I honestly wish I didn't have to put up with your bullcrap. You're only here because of divorced whoopee." Meaning he was conceived when his parents did the deed after their divorce. I was sitting there in stunned silence as she storms off. My friend just starts laughing as if it's the funniest thing he's ever heard. He would even proudly tell people that he was here because of divorced whoopee, with this big grin on his face. Just had this happen today. Hold the dog's leash or I'll strangle you with it. This was said by a father to his 5-year-old kid. The dog was a youngish-looking German Shepherd. My son has hydranencephaly, and his head is a little larger than normal because of a buildup of CSF fluid. Once at an appointment, a kid in a wheelchair, probably 5 or 6 years old, said quietly and innocently to his dad, "Look at that kid's head." And his dad replies, "Don't talk about him, you're in a wheelchair." Now, I'm all for parents using my son as a teaching opportunity to break stigma on special needs kids, or educate their kids on how to speak politely, say hi, or ask a polite question about special needs people, but I was shocked that this kid's dad said that to him. Don't make me regret not going to the clinic. We were getting in line to get ice cream when I noticed $20 on the ground. I asked if it belonged to anyone. A middle-aged woman and a teenage girl, presumably her daughter, sitting near us, noticed. The mother nudged the daughter and said, "I think that's yours." And the daughter didn't even look away from her ice cream and said, "No, it's not." The mother presses on, saying, "Are you sure? I think it is." This back and forth continued. Clearly it isn't hers and the mother wants her to take the $20 anyway. Eventually the kid gives up and agrees, saying she thinks it's hers. Taking the $20 wasn't what bothered us. It was insisting your daughter do the wrong thing even when she clearly doesn't want to lie. I overheard a father shout, "Stop crying. Why do you always have to make everything about you? Everything is just the worst thing ever, isn't it?" at his hysterical toddler. Today. If you get hurt, you're in trouble. If you get in trouble, I'm gonna hurt you. The other day, the couple that lives in the apartment downstairs from me were outside trying to get their kids to be quiet and get in their car seats. But they were crying and arguing. The dad was going on with the "shut up, stop crying, stop yelling" stuff, but it was only making them worse. Then the mum really calmly walked over to the door and said, "I'm tired of you two fighting. I don't want 2 kids anymore. If this is what having 2 kids is like, I don't want 2 kids. I'm giving one of you guys up. You'd better decide which one of you is staying." That shut them up, though. I should clarify that when I say it's disturbing, it's only really messed up out of context, and I kind of understand why she'd say that. Honestly, I thought it was pretty funny. Was at a ghetto CVS, and a parent told her child something along the lines of, "If you keep crying, I'm going to pull out a piece and shoot ya. If you don't shut the frick up, I'm going to beat the crap out of you." This was on base, and the man was yelling into his car. I'll always regret not calling the cops. A father telling his preteen daughter how she was going to grow up to be a hussy just like her mother. She couldn't have been more than 11. On the train around early December last year, I overheard a father shouting at his, couldn't have been much older than 6, son, and threatening him with, "Santa won't bring you any presents if you keep acting like a little crap bag." To which the kid replied, "How can you make Santa do that?" And the father, kneeling down to make eye contact with his son, said, "I'll wait for him to come down the chimney, and then I'll punch all his fricking teeth out, that's how." I'm sure the son loved both Christmas and his dad after that. My fiancé and I were at dinner last year, and we were seated next to this really bizarre-looking family. It was busy and tables were jammed close, so we heard everything they said. The daughter had to have been around 13, and was carrying a little kid's stuffed animal and holding it the whole time. The mum wouldn't let the daughter order what she wanted and started body-shaming her kid, who was skinny but clearly going through puberty, telling her how disgusting and fat her hips were starting to get. Mum, by the way, was morbidly obese. Of course. So the girl ended up having to split a salad with her dad, while her slightly older brother had like 3 plates full of food sat right in front of him. What do you even do when you witness unfolding childhood traumas like this taking place right in front of you? This is actually mortifying, and I would love to know in the comments, even if I never end up running into any of it myself. I heard one of my old neighbors say to her son, "If you keep crying like a little B-word, I'll put you in a dress." You want to wear a dress? No? Then shut the F up. I was outside gardening with my daughter, who was about 6 at the time. Her eyes just went wide and she asked me why she would talk to her kids like that. I didn't really have a good answer. I was at Kroger browsing through an aisle. 2 young men were there with an older man, I'm guessing their father. One of them was talking about how he beat the crap out of his girlfriend recently and how he felt like a terrible person about it. The older gent put his hands on his shoulders and says, "Son, boys will be boys." I always tell my 1-year-old I'm going to give her a knuckle sandwich if she whacks me with her maraca again. Then she laughs and donks me on the head with it. Threatening to bite her little toesies off doesn't work either. "Stop mucking about, you little C-word, or I'll frickin' thrash ya." A mother talking to her child while walking them to school in front of all the other kids and their parents. This was in a low-income neighborhood in Australia. I used to work in a kindergarten and we had a kid around 3 years old who wouldn't and mostly couldn't talk yet. He said a few words at home, but while in kindergarten he only made noises and gestures to get us to understand, but was making progress and we were getting medical help at the request of the mother. At this time, it was popular between the older kids to go to each other's places after kindergarten, and this kid really wanted to join that, but the mother's answer? When you start talking to your friends, you can go to their place after kindergarten. And no surprise, all our progress was lost, and he locked himself in even more. I was in shock. I just couldn't believe what I'd heard. This woman was so unhappy with her son not talking, nagging day in and day out that we must help her, and she just throws every piece of progress out the window. It was so sad. This actually was just said to me. It happened last year. I'm a dancer and I used to compete on teams and as a soloist. I don't really compete anymore, college, you know? One day I was competing my solo and just touching up my makeup in the dressing room where I accidentally was in the way of a mum and her daughter who was my age. I said, "Sorry, I'll be out of your way in a second," and the mum said I was totally fine and something about sharing a bathroom with siblings. I laugh and say, "Oh yeah, I get you. I have 3 younger siblings myself," and the mum says, "Really? I would have stopped after you," right in front of her kid. I smiled uncomfortably, grabbed my bag and moved to the other side of the room. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My first job in my small little town in Australia was manning the toy section of the local Target. It was a lower-end suburb, so there was a pretty big Indigenous population that stayed in the area. Most of the people actually working at the Target were either white or some suitably civilized shade of brown. Anyway, what I'm saying is everyone working there was slightly racist and would pay a little more attention to anyone Indigenous who happened to walk in. To reduce shrinkage, of course. So one day I'm in the toy aisle rearranging all the Barbie dolls that some idiot kids had taken off the shelf and abandoned in homewares when this Aboriginal lady walks by with her daughter. The girl couldn't have been more than 8, and like any 8-year-old, she naturally makes a beeline for the Barbies and picks one up to look at it. Her mum, who let her hand go for a moment, yells, "You put that down or they'll think you're stealing it," and grabs the girl by the hand and walks off. I felt like crap, not the least because that B-word Sandra, who manned the front of the store, had been quietly trailing the two of them since they entered. Imagine being surrounded by that level of hostility your entire life, that you have to pass wisdom like, "Don't pick stuff up from the shelf or people will think you're stealing," to your kids. People who think Indigenous Aussies should just get over it have no gosh darn idea how bad it is for them in some areas. Made me ashamed to work there. Not someone else, but me. When I was 11 or 12, we went to Disney and my dad kept bugging me about why I looked so unhappy. I wasn't, I just have a resting B-word face. Eventually, we were at some chicken restaurant surrounded by tons of people and he called me an ungrateful B-word in front of about 30 people. Just a month ago, me and my boyfriend went to Disney World in Florida. While eating lunch in a quieter, more isolated area, we saw a dad drag his 8-ish-year-old daughter to a table near us and in hushed tones, but loud enough for us to hear, he said, "You don't deserve to be here, you ungrateful B-word." The rest of the family arrived shortly after with trays of food and the dad pulled out a tinfoil-wrapped sandwich from the mum's purse and threw it at his daughter while the parents and 2 other kids ate the burgers and fries from the quick-serve restaurant. I just felt sick and wanted to cry. I saw a 2 to 3-year-old kid lagging behind his mum. She turned to him and said, "Get up here, motherfricker." Wasn't super disturbing, just funny and kind of vaguely racist. I was iced in Birmingham, Alabama earlier this year. While I was getting some continental breakfast, a man walked up to the coffee dispenser with his daughter of about 4 years of age. He says to her, "Honey, always like your coffee how you like your men, light and sweet." Nothing like vague Alabaman racial bias instilled at a young age. I overheard a mother tell her son that he'd have to hold it in until church was over. The kid was obviously desperate to go and the preacher had only just begun his sermon, but the mother was intent on making him stay for the entire service. I'm the parent in this one. My son has one of those kitchen playsets and various toy or utensil or food items, and refers to playing with the set as home living. An awesome name for it he picked up at daycare. One day, during the height of his infatuation with home living, we were at a store and he wasn't following me, and he kept grabbing stuff off the shelf or was, in general, engaging in a behavior that I needed to correct him on. So I told him, "Son, you need to listen to me or you're going to lose your home living privilege." It pretty quickly dawned on me that without context, that must have sounded pretty concerning to people around us. That's wonderfully unfortunate. I wonder if you got glared out of the store by everyone in hearing radius. Who knows, maybe a kid as rambunctious as that would enjoy an evening out in the tent in the backyard. Honestly, the young narrator would probably have been thrilled at that prospect. Funny what'll interest a kid under 10 years old. I was in Walmart about 10 years ago. I saw the exact moment a woman grabbed her small son, about 6, by the arm as he was crying, and she shook him a few times while yelling, "Break yourself, fool." I was at a condo community pool and overheard children berating this Asian couple. The kids were straight up telling them to go back to China and using slurs. The Asian couple were infuriated and told the kid that he's being racist. They then turned to the mother, and instead of apologizing, the mother told the kids to continue what they were saying and that the Asian couple had no right to tell their kids off. I had no idea what was going on until I put the pieces together an hour after the event. It still makes me mad to this day. My dad used to be a police officer. I was at the grocery store with him, and a woman in line near us had a kid who wouldn't stop crying. She pointed in our direction and told her kid my dad would take him to jail if he didn't shut up. After a day of whale watching, my girlfriend and I stopped off in Buena Park to have dinner. We were sitting in a booth by a window where she could watch the rain. A homeless man came up the sidewalk, pushing a shopping cart overloaded with stuff. She was wearing a halter top and stretch shorts, but it's California and not really cold out. As she's passing, one of her cart wheels hits something and her cart almost tips over. She frantically struggles to keep it upright and only loses the rolled-up blankets and some clothes. She was trying to pick up her stuff, but it wasn't easy with the rain coming down. I heard laughing and turned to see a family, Mum, Dad, and 2 kids, a boy and a girl, looking about 9 and 12 respectively, watching the woman and having a grand time laughing at her misfortune. Dad pointed at the woman and said something, making everyone roar with laughter, and then the daughter said something. I couldn't hear everything, but the parents were obviously teaching their children to look down and even ridicule the less fortunate. I guess this isn't that disturbing as much as it is what the frick. I once overheard a woman yelling at her toddler for crying. She said, "Shut up, why are you crying? You're acting like such a baby." I don't know which. Maybe it's because it's less than 2 years old and that's how it communicates with the world and lets you know something isn't right. I will not allow you to go to college. This person wasn't talking to the kid, but he was right next to her listening. I heard someone tell her friend that her kid would never move out and he'd be that loser living in his parents' basement all his life, right in front of him. To supplement that awfulness, anytime I did anything my mum didn't like I didn't clean something to her standard, she'd tell me what a loser I was and how worthless I was. I think that's why it bothers me that someone would say that to their kid. Just last night, at my significant other's very Christian parents' house, his mum said to their 27-year-old daughter who's dating for the second time in her life, "That sounds to me like you're pursuing him, and I don't like that." It was eye-opening. Pretty much everything in this thread is things my mother said to me as a child, or rather screamed at me, except the swearing. She'll never swear. Swearing is punishable by one heck of a beating in her book. Some of the things she thinks are more acceptable to say to a child than swear words include, "I've had enough of you, I'm putting you in a home," she'd pick up the phone and pretend to dial, or "Stop that noise or I'll beat you black and blue." In this case, I'd been crying because I was 4 and my brother had just thrown me, literally out of a bunk bed. I'd already told her this. Here's some others. "You're a B-word, no wonder all your boyfriends leave you. They find out what you're really like." I was a teenager when she said that one. "If it wasn't for me, you'd be starving on the streets because no one else would want you. If you don't stop complaining, I'm going to tell that policeman what you're like at home and he'll throw you straight in prison. Your friend's parents wouldn't put up with this behavior. They'd have got rid of you a long time ago." And so on and so forth, you get the idea. It wasn't like verbal, but once I saw a kid and his mum at a Toys R Us and the child touched one of the displays. His mother panicked at this and yanked his hand away and held it up in the air as she ran him over to the bathroom, presumably to wash his hands. It was so dramatic. "I brought you into this world and I can take you out of it," said my own mother on several occasions. As much as I can't stand kids, this teed me off. In a Walmart checkout line, go figure, Some B-word looked at her 5-year-old and told him she'd strangle the breath out of your worthless butt if you don't shut the frick up. Was at the Science Center in St. Louis on Valentine's Day with my girlfriend at the time. We were walking across the covered bridge connecting the two sides, and there was a mum with her child walking in front of us. He was maybe a foot in front of her when she screamed at the top of her lungs, "If you keep walking that far in front of me, someone is going to steal you," and just kept walking. The kid didn't even react, and the mum never closed the very small gap between her and her son. Most disturbing to me isn't the nasty or violent stuff, it's the subtle everyday things that bit by bit make the kid view themselves as a bad person. If you tell a child they're naughty or difficult or awkward or whatever every day for years, that child is going to grow up to be those things. It's why when I'm at work, I work in a preschool, I'm careful to chastise children's actions, not the children themselves, when they do something wrong. So there's a noodle place near where I used to live. It's basically a shack that the owners have to build from scratch every night when they open. Pretty third world, I know. Anyway, me and my roommates were having dinner when we overheard the owner of the noodle place saying something to her 2-year-old daughter sucking on a soda bottle. It was something along the lines of, "You better learn how to use your mouth like that now because you'll be doing it a lot when you're older." Me and my roommates stared at each other in disbelief. You have till the count of 3 to stop crying. 1 second passed. 3. The store went dead silent after that, and I never heard that voice again. Okay, this isn't something I heard, but it was something I saw, and it was pretty weird and quite disturbing. So I was working as a tourist informer, and then a woman came in with a young girl. She wasn't too young, maybe around 11 or 12, very quiet, quite normal looking, until I realized the woman was keeping the girl on a fricking leash. I'm not kidding. She had like those corsets with leashes that people put on their babies, but for a tween. Their mother just looked at the information and left the girl on the leash. I was like, what the cosmic eternal frick did I just see? What weird habits have you developed from growing up poor? I still can't bring myself to write in Mad Lib books, or on things that could be reused. Growing up ultra poor, it was a rare treat to get something frivolous, but Mad Libs were also semi-educational, so every once in a while I'd get a new Mad Lib book from my dad. But I felt a ton of anxiety about wasting them by directly writing in them. If I numbered the blanks and then wrote on a separate sheet of paper with the corresponding numbers, I could reuse the books over and over again. Being really poor made me live in this awful anxiety-driven state of don't use it up because you might not get any more anytime soon, and you'd better use it all and not waste anything, which made me overthink and overanalyze my actions. I was confronted by this preference to not mess things up in my master's degree program, because the professor would expressly tell me it was okay to write on the handouts because she'd share the digital copies with us, so we'd have a clean copy to use in our own classes later, and I still couldn't do it. Using plastic grocery bags as trash bags. Don't really see the point in using actual garbage bags. Anytime someone tries to buy me food or anything for me, I always go for the dollar menu or try to go for the lowest amount even if they say buy whatever. I mean, that's just courtesy. When people offer to buy me Starbucks, I order tea. It's the cheapest thing you can get from there. There's an expectation not to order the lobster equivalent on a menu when someone is being nice to you. Operating under a barter system with friends. Where I grew up, there wasn't much money. So people often bartered goods and services and often exchanged small handmade gifts as payment. Then I moved and discovered that wealthier people don't do that at all. Not letting anyone in the house. Even though I don't have to, as much, I still calculate how many hours I have to work in order to afford something to decide if it's a need or a want. Do I want to work 2.5 hours to fill my gas tank, or 2.5 hours to buy a single t-shirt? I want the shirt, but the shirt isn't going to get me to work. I really want a Switch and several new games, and I'll have to work at least 9 days to afford the Switch and the 3 games I want. And after I've worked those 9 days, I can't justify spending the money on the Switch and the games. The narrator finds that whenever they have a big expense on the horizon, or something they've been saving towards for a while, one starts to think of other purchases in terms of what fraction of the big spend they would equate to. It gets really hard to enjoy things like an annual gym membership when you realize it's 1/100th of an apartment deposit. It makes you value it more though, I guess. For a brighter side to this, the following commenter provides a counter-argument. This was a huge issue for me. My husband helped me realize that hours of enjoyment are worth something at least. What I did to get our Switch and 2 games is to save 2 days of work time per paycheck. I sacrificed some other things for entertainment and bought it for him on Father's Day. We don't have kids, but he is my puppy papa. After calling around to find the cheapest used Switch combo, we've already enjoyed it for hours more than I worked to get it. Also, our nieces think we're nothing short of gods. I legit cringe when I buy anything slightly expensive, and I find myself constantly buying the super cheap store brands instead of the name brand stuff. I mean, Costco liquor is literally made in the same plants as the name brand stuff. I dated a richer girl who told me she'd never had Chef Boyardee or SpaghettiOs before, but was disgusted by them. Apparently her parents had always told her, growing up, that canned food was for dogs. What the frick? Her saying that hit especially close to home, because I eat SpaghettiOs with a grilled cheese at least 3 times a week. My dad grew up even poorer than me, and he won't eat Chef Boyardee because it's so crappy. I like cheap wine. Even when my budget allows for a $75 bottle, I'll buy the $10. I still prefer thin, rough bath towels. Big fluffy towels are too fluffy. It feels weird when fluffy towels get wet. I grew up middle class and I hated fluffy towels. My mother would buy new ones every couple of months and it drove me freaking bonkers to the point I just stashed my own supply of rough towels. The other day I was at a thrift store and I saw some towels in a pack and I brought them. $6 brought me 10 towels in what I consider to be perfect condition. After some hot washes with enzymatic detergent and borax, they were amazing. I love these towels. I'm not sure if it's odd or unusual, but my parents used to tell me, eat all the food served. Since we were poor and sometimes they wouldn't eat so I could have a full serving of food. I'm no longer poor, but I still eat the full plate no matter how full I am. And yes, I'm aware that you can put food in the fridge for the next day, so it's not the most healthy thing either, but it's the flawed solution my parents found so I wouldn't be picky with the food or not eat on a whim. This really messed me up as a kid. Now I just go without and I eat leftovers from the plates of the kids I watch for friends and family. They think it's funny that I'm only hungry when cooking and when everything else is done. I hope they never figure out how poor I really am. Toast with butter and cinnamon is my favorite go-to for breakfast. Eating fast. I had 4 siblings and only so much food was made for dinner. If you didn't eat fast, you didn't eat. Yeah, I know the feeling. However, I learned to eat fast from prison. I haven't served time since '94, but I still wolf down my food to this day. It's a hard habit to break. I just buy 1 pair of trainers and I wear them until they fall off my feet. Then I buy a new pair. I make good money as an adult, but I still do this. I also don't buy branded clothes. I worked with a guy and we earned the same money, yet he collected limited edition trainers and drove an expensive car. I just couldn't comprehend the waste in money. I cycle everywhere because it's good for my health. I moved to Switzerland in a few weeks for a job that pays 2.5 times my current salary, and I still intend to cycle everywhere. I am, to this day, unable to manage my money. Going from not being able to spend anything to having at least $300 left for whatever I want made me spend recklessly. You'd think it would be the opposite growing up poor, but spending feels so good. This is fairly common. Most people in your situation will buy things since experience has taught them they don't know when they'll have money to spend things on again. So they end up spending it all, thus having no more money. I love Little Caesars $5 pizza more than fancy brick oven pizza because spending that gives me too much anxiety to enjoy the food. I was visiting my folks and my mum ordered pizza from Round Table, Southern California, and it came out to $64 for 2 large pizzas and 1 small. What the frick? Not having a lot of clothes. I can't stand a cluttered closet, and having more than about 3 pairs of shoes seems excessive to me. Ditto. I had 4 pairs of shoes once, and I felt like I was suffocating, but they were all necessary. 1 pair for work, 1 for church, 1 for daily use, and 1 pair of gym shoes. Not filling up the gas tank because you might really need the money later. $10 at a time. Save another $10, that's food for a week just in case. There were 5 of us growing up, so we always had our good clothes and our everyday clothes. We changed out our good clothes as soon as we got home from school, and I still have this habit to this day. I changed out of my work clothes and into lounge around the house I don't care clothes as soon as I get home. The narrator does this too, but it's as much out of a desire, nay, a need to lounge on the couch in his underpants in a slovenly, disgusting fashion than any sense of self-preservation for his good clothes. Off-brand foods. So much cheaper. Love me a can of beans. If I have no dinner, no problem, I get a can of beans. They're also super healthy and food for your digestive system. You know what? I've gotten used to not having a bed frame, and I ended up using just the mattress and box spring and having old flat pillows instead of new fluffed up ones. I can sleep anywhere. Slept on the floor for a good couple of years, and I can handle heat pretty well because we didn't have AC. It was a one-window unit until senior year. Can literally watch anything and be entertained because we only had one local Channel 10 station. Saying all this sounds like I grew up in the 50s, but gosh darn it, this was all in the mid-2000s. I still buy used clothes. Me too. I try to say it's because I want to be environmentally conscious, but really, I just can't bring myself to spend more than $6 on a top. I eat a lot of frozen chicken pot pies. The crust is amazing. Lots of people mix it all up. I eat the crust last, but I hate crust on actual pie. I developed a dislike of wearing new shoes. I prefer old, worn-out shoes. The new pairs feel too rigid. Even though I have the money to replace them now, I still wear the same pair of boots I brought my senior year in high school. I'm in my mid-20s now. They've been worn through every crappy job I've worked through college, and in every office job I've worked since getting my degree. Through most of my good times, hardships, and adventures, they've been what's on my feet. It's an odd thing to get attached to, but when you've had them for years and they're broken in just right, they're a tough thing to replace. Keeping all of my clothes, even though I'll never wear them. I didn't have much growing up, so now I feel like I need to keep everything. A close friend grew up very poor and unsupported. Things were always a competition between him and his brothers, so he maintained that mentality into adulthood in many respects. Fast forward to us going to a Smash Bros tournament. He's egging me on while I'm playing the other people, but I'm sincerely supportive of him when he goes up for his own match. As we leave the store, he basically says, "Wow, I was a butthole to you while you were constantly cheering me on. I feel kinda bad now." He just prefers being competitive in nearly any aspect, though it's certainly gotten way calmer lately. I get freaked out if my pantry isn't full. It doesn't even matter if it's food I like, I just have this fear of not having food in the house. Not turning on the heater no matter how cold it gets, just layer up and lots of blankets. Saving every cent I can. I'm talking 80 cents for 60-cent cans of beans, and never buying actual brand name anything. Pinching pennies never seems to leave you. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Mac and cheese with tuna. Cheap, but so good. I ignore the dates on a lot of food. The milk I smell just before I use it to make sure it's not sour. Constantly checking the bread for mold when I know it's past the date. Smelling the meat before I cook it to make sure it's okay. Unless something is like 6 or more months past the date, it's usually good. The expiration is just the warning that means you have to start checking it. This shouldn't be a poor thing. Food waste is so terrible, and most of those dates are either inaccurate or mean best before, which is about quality, not edibility. And with some things, you can pick or cut off the mold, like cheese. Maybe bad fruit in a bunch, cooking it more thoroughly or cooking it early to then eat a couple of days later. Buying cheap things and making peace with the fact that they will eventually break, it may not taste good or it won't fit me, instead of investing in something long-lasting. I can't travel. I'd love to. I could probably afford to now. But dropping any amount of money on a trip seems insane to me. I grew up never really going anywhere outside of a 3-hour drive and only stayed in hotels maybe about 3 times while I was under 18. It also feels weird to be in debt, but managing it. I have medical bills that I'm paying off and credit card stuff, but it's all pretty manageable. Growing up, my mum constantly would get payday loans, and we had bill collectors calling non-stop about medical debt, and my mum maxed out every credit card she owned. So I was taught that debt was horrible and you could never get out of it. Also, I really love microwaved tortillas and cheese as a whole meal. That and lettuce, cheese, and ranch wrapped up in a tortilla.
I think back on it though, and I'm really not sure how my parents raised me with how much they made. I make double now what both my parents' combined income was when I was in high school, and I really don't even make that much. Plus-sized women. The only skinny chicks in the hood were the working girls who did smack. You know, I never considered this aspect of growing up in a rougher neighborhood. I mean, that might just be your personal taste as well. But it sure would be interesting to do a study of some sort on it based on people from different backgrounds. Leftovers are my jam. I take home friends' leftovers. I have no shame. I can find a good way to reheat just about anything. Expiration dates are like yellow lights. The concept of selling a car is entirely foreign to me. We drive cars until they die so completely that even the junkyard doesn't want to pay for them. Keeping the lights off almost all the time, or biking everywhere. Only ever buying clothes if there's a really good sale. I never just go out to buy new clothes. I like fake maple syrup better than the real stuff. I love walking everywhere. If it's within a 60-minute walk, sometimes even longer, I'm that person that will walk and wants everyone to join me for the exercise and adventure, when everyone else is begging me to take a 5 or 10-minute Lyft or Uber. Heck no! Why would I pay for something when I can get exercise and have a pleasant stroll for free? It's just so nice to walk around and see your city. My friends will pay $5 for an Uber to not walk 5 minutes in the relatively okay part of downtown LA. But I enjoy walking around and seeing the buildings, people, hot dog stands, and random YouTubers, which I would normally have missed out on had I gotten an Uber and started scrolling Instagram. Little strolls make you appreciate the little things in life. I'll start with my own. I can't stand actual quality toilet paper. I can only tolerate the cheap sandpapery thin garbage. The nice plush stuff feels gross to me. We used to eat butter bread, which is just butter on one slice of bread folded over hot dog style. Still slaps to this day, I don't care. I'm plus-sized and losing weight quickly now. I've come to believe being fat in the first place, for me, has a lot to do with never knowing if we'd have enough food from week to week. Also, I grew up with the mentality of, if it's free, take it and take as much as you can. I used to enjoy just eating a tub of saltines, with butter if I felt fancy. My parents grew up poor, and we didn't rise well into the middle class until a decade into my father's career. It still shows. We always do leftovers and plan several meals around discounted food. Say a big piece of beef or turkey after the holidays. We'll have a nice meal and then eat nothing but turkey for about 2 weeks afterwards. Even now that my dad is well off, they don't buy new cars and their house is a construction project because they brought a teardown in a nice neighborhood. My siblings and I all play instruments, and all our instruments are second-hand or broken pieces my dad refurbished and gave to us as our birthday or Christmas presents. We also do joint mum and dad and grandma and grandpa gifts, laptops as high school graduation presents. When I was younger, my mum used to have a coupon book and she lived by it. But after my dad started making more, she just stopped. I also remember driving and never flying, like driving clear across the US because it was cheaper than 4 tickets plus a dog. Only buying clothes to go back to school, and then finding out that in the working world, this turns into only buying clothes for a new job. I don't like giving or receiving opulent, frivolous gifts. I always feel harshly like the money should be saved or spent on something practical. Eating cold food out of a tin. Not a problem. Conversely, hot cocoa made with water. I never take anything for granted. Even though I have a good job that pays 6 figures, I always spend frugally and have ample savings and a backup plan in the event that I should become unemployed. I don't waste money on non-essentials, and I try to make things last as long as possible, like cars or electronics, before I replace them. I secretly feel like anyone who orders any drink but water at a restaurant is insane. Even when my in-laws take us out, I order water because I don't want to take advantage of them. Not flushing the toilet. My dad said it was to save water. I flush water in public bathrooms, just not my own. Ugh, my dad used to do this. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to take a leak, lift the toilet lid, and be confronted by the odor of his fermenting pee. I like splurging when it's for something special for someone else. I hate buying something nice that I really want for myself, and worse, when someone else goes out of their way to give me something nice. Canned green beans are better than frozen or fresh green beans. Change my mind. When people use 2 to 3 paper towels to dry their hands off when it can be done with just one sheet, or using paper towels at all, that's what hand towels are for. Dish rags were for washing dishes, and Dad's old white undershirts were cut into pieces for cleaning. Paper towels were a luxury right up there with paper plates. No spending money on stuff you're just going to throw away. Except toilet paper, thank God my parents were never too cheap for that. Thank you to our authors for once again confronting the narrator with the truly rainforest butchering amount of paper towels he goes through on a weekly basis. I've really got to tone that crap down. I grew up with some money, but don't have much nowadays. My family bought an old house and renovated it. I was involved there since I was about 10 years old. And I've always been interested in crafting and woodworking and such. I learned electronics in a specialized school for 2 years until I decided to do something else. So I like doing stuff myself. I know how to fix most electronic devices, so when I want something new, I just buy it as broken off eBay or flea markets and fix it. I don't remember what I paid for this 21-inch LG screen that I'm currently looking at, but it wasn't much because it didn't work. A capacitor for less than €1 fixed it. I do woodworking and build my own furniture, some at least, preferably with wood that others don't need anymore. I always cook at home and bake my own bread. And actually, I buy cheap, but usually stuff that's good quality. My latest is an old broken drill, Metabo. I paid €1 for it and it's already running again. People just don't know how to fix things and throw everything away once it stops working. Cold hot dogs are still one of my favorite snacks. Super cheap and quick, and it's basically a bologna tube. Also, not really a preference, but I'll never touch a random dog or walk up behind one without making myself known and asking the owner if it's okay. It seems obvious, but living in LA, people will grab or let their children pet strange dogs without even asking. Growing up, every dog was seen as a guard dog until someone said otherwise. Medicine, painkillers, and doctor visits are too expensive. If it isn't sufficient to interfere with work, then you deal with it. I'm between jobs at the moment. Recently went to a minutes clinic in CVS because I thought I had a blood clot. I was there for less than 5 minutes, turned out to be a large burst blood vessel. Cost me $140, and the next time I think I'll just risk dying. A Totino's pizza roll in the microwave is better than a Totino's pizza roll from the oven. Leftovers must be eaten. Food waste is not a thing in my house. If I have to throw out any food, I just think, well, that's money and a meal wasted. It makes me anxious and angry. Can't help myself though. I was starved as a child along with being poor and was homeless for a year. Food is everything. I'm not materialistic and I can't really relate to those that are. I don't send food back that is wrong unless it's disgusting. I'll eat what was given to me. I slept in my jeans because there was no heating in my childhood home until my mum remarried. I did this until I was 14 and I noticed that some of the blue denim dye had actually made my knees bluish-grey. I had to stop then. Doing a large load of laundry so I don't waste water and detergent on a smaller load. My mum used to get annoyed when we did a load but didn't fill it all the way because it wasted water. My boyfriend's mum doesn't understand why I let the hamper become full because she'll do a load that has 4 pieces of clothing in it. She basically washes whatever she wore that day the same day. Maybe she'll combine 2 days' worth of clothes. I know exactly how much I can put in the washer and have it be really full, but not so full that the clothes don't come out fully cleaned. Also, ramen. Loved ramen when I was a kid and money was tight, and I love it now. What was the most WTF thing that a customer brought in to a second-hand shop? I worked at a weapons shop, and a shady-looking guy brought in a few pairs of night vision goggles, like high-end military-grade PVS-14 night vision goggles. I asked him why he was selling them. Oh, I just don't need them anymore. Oh, cool, man. Do you mind if I call the company real quick and run the numbers? Sometimes this stuff is stolen property. As soon as I said that, he jumped across the counter, grabbed the goggles, and bolted for the door. A guy brought in a stack of about 15 laptops that all said, "Property of Cleveland Public High School," right on the top of each one. He then threatened to shoot me when I told him to get out. Okay, because people are asking, yes, I'm aware that schools and businesses can sometimes sell off old laptops, which is why I don't flat out call the cops when someone brings in suspected stolen items. There's always the chance that no matter how obviously stolen it is, the person owns it legitimately. However, I'm not going to risk my job or my conscience by taking an item if it has a label on it claiming it's someone else's property. Also, how am I supposed to sell a laptop that says property of city, public schools on it? Pawn shops have a bad enough rap as it is. I know a few guys who've run these sort of shops. One thing I've seen was a guy who brought in smoke grenades and M249 saw belts that he had stolen from our local military drill center. Another was a guy at a local weapons store who brought in a piece that had an illegal oil filter suppressor on it. They told the guy to get the frick out and go destroy that thing. A buddy of mine worked at a pawn shop for a few years. They had a guy try to sell them a police walkie-talkie, like straight stolen from a car but with the battery taken out. They told him to get effed and called the cops. I believe they picked the guy up a few hours later. This just reminded me of my friend who pawned the DSLR camera I let him borrow for a school project. I asked for it back a good amount of times and not once did he tell me what he did with it. I had to hear it from someone else and then he claimed that I gave it to him. A man brought in a bag of white snow and asked if I would buy it, then resell it back to him in a couple of days. Bold plan on the part of the seller here. Unfortunately, there's no further detail as to whether they called the cops on them, but there is a pretty funny follow-up comment. "Hey boss, this guy just sold us like 10 kilos of white snow and wants to buy it back in a few days." Weird, what's the point in exchanging 5 kilos of substances back and forth? Is this some sort of scam? I don't know. When he comes back to pick up his 2.5 kilos, we'll have to ask about that. Not an owner, but I got a call from a pawn shop saying that one of my at-home employees tried to sell her work computer. It has my company's logo and contact info right on it, plain as day. How stupid can some people be? A school security guard pawned his service weapon and other equipment. He got caught by his supervisor carrying around a pellet shooter. I knew someone once who was into some bad stuff. He didn't have his school-provided laptop at class one day, and never again after that. As it turns out, it was his, for these laptops were indeed our own personal property, even though the school, quote, gave them to us. But the thing is, what they meant by giving each student a nice free laptop was overcharging the mother effers ×2 and building it into the price of tuition, and therefore the student loan. So I had that computer for a while, and he sold his to a pawn shop. How many college students do you know who would refuse a new MacBook Pro back in 2010 that they wouldn't have to pay for until they began paying back their student loans? A guy literally brought in a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. He was doing yard work for this old lady whose husband had passed. She gave it to him for doing some yard work, not realizing it was live and active. The guy was career military, and after the bomb squad came and disabled it, they went to her house and found a trove of similarly very illegal military-grade weapons. Just a worker at one of these stores, but we had a couple come in to pawn their backhoe over the weekends. Happens a lot, and brought their bill of sale. They wanted a simple $1,000 loan, which wasn't bad considering how much it was worth. No more than 30 minutes later, cops are there with the owner. Apparently they worked for him and went and pawned all of his industrial equipment. In a similar vein, my friend found some green herb in the oven he brought from a used appliance store. The shop called him to ask about the oven. Luckily, he didn't give out his address. I literally had a customer come in and say, "Hi, I've just stolen this phone off my sister. How much will you give me for it?" Also had a customer bring in 5 MacBooks at the same time with a certain logo on it which gave me the impression they were stolen. I told him to leave them with me for testing and called the police. Had another customer bring in a gun and a crossbow. That was weird. I'm in the UK and this is not a normal thing. Story from the 90s. My Fender Stratocaster was stolen and I reported it. Couple of years passed and an officer called me. "Your guitar serial number showed up at a pawn shop." Great, so you know who stole it. The guy who sold it at a pawn shop said it was a present from his girlfriend, but she died. Okay, so I get my guitar back? No, the pawn shop already sold it. Don't they have to check serial numbers? Yeah, but that can take 30 days and we can't expect them to hold on to this stuff forever. What? So what do I do now? Nothing really. So why are you calling me? I just thought you'd want to know. Bye. True story. Most stuff isn't even worth the time to report it stolen. You always got to look out for the people who bring in a crap ton of brand spanking new tools or electronics. Over time, you learn to read people based on their appearance, behavior, and personal information. An experienced broker can almost always immediately sleuth out whether they're stolen or not. In these cases, they mostly are. I've never had someone intentionally bring in illicit items, but it's important to check pockets and compartments on cases and similar things. It's not unheard of for some eclectic customer to forget about a little baggie of green herb that they'd stashed. One guy paid off his loan with cash, and there was a thin layer of white residue coating it. The first time I'd seen that one. And not illegal, but toward the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak, some wisecrack nutcase did try to sell us disinfectant. Funny, but also annoying. I wonder if that last guy had acquired all of his before eBay and Amazon had stopped letting others price gorge off them. If so, double screw that guy. I had this guitar that had a little sliding door on the side, meant to hold picks. I put green herb in there as a joke. I completely forgot about it as I was selling it. They were pretty chill. Oh god, there was this one really weird guy who brought in a dead duck while hunting is illegal in my area, and also just why? Wouldn't call this illegal per se, but I feel like I have to share this. A friend of mine owns a pawn shop, and one day a guy walks in with a cardboard box filled to the top with his own number 2. He claims that it's magic, and my friend cuts him off right there and kicks him out. As he's walking out, he drops the box by accident and gets all of his crap on the floor. Sees the mess he's made, stares at the horrid pile of feces for a couple of seconds and runs out of the shop. My friend never got his name and never saw him again. The smell would proceed to linger in the shop for a good month after it was cleaned up. I was in the US Army from the early 1990s until 2014, and I knew a guy like this in about 1993 or 94. Our whole unit moved from Fort Lewis, Washington, down to Fort Polk, Louisiana. This genius goes into the little local town and gets a Radio Shack credit card because active duty military members were pretty much immediately approved because of our guaranteed monthly income. Smart guy comes up with a great plan to buy a bunch of stuff at Radio Shack when he needed a few bucks, then take it down the road and sell it at the local pawn shop. It was all new equipment in a sealed box, so the pawn shop gave him about 15% of the retail price for everything he brought in. He just figured that after a few years, he'd be making enough money to pay off the credit card bills, or that the credit card company would just drop the charges. He was such a screw-up. He was being processed for discharge and he didn't even realize it. The last I saw, he was getting kicked out with nowhere to go afterward. I felt bad for him, but at the same time, I liked seeing him get messed over for knowingly messing over the system for so long. I was in a pawn shop when this happened. Someone brought in a wheelchair with the tag for the local hospital on the back. Example, property of somewhere hospital. The pawn shop owner told him to leave it and get out. They did, and he called the non-emergency line. The police came and picked it up and took it back to the hospital, or that's what they said they were doing anyway. A friend of mine owns a shop. One day a woman walks in and asks if there's a female employee she could talk to. No problem, it's a family shop and his 18-year-old daughter comes out to help her. She asks to go out to her car where she opens the trunk. Whole thing is packed with bedroom toys, bondage stuff, outfits, and a big box of phallic items. The woman says her sister, who recently passed away, sold this stuff at parties, and she had no idea what to do with it. I used to work at a pawn store. A shady guy brought in a tiger skull. I don't remember if it was illegal or not, but the owner was yelling at him. He kept coming back and bringing animal skin and skulls. I think the police substance busted his house, from what the owner told me. A friend of mine owns a rather unique store with a lot of authentic medieval weaponry, armor, clothing, and similar. While I was there, a young couple decided his shop was the place to sell a few old SS daggers, belts, flags, and other Third Reich memorabilia. Solid logic, except for one thing. We're in Germany. Here, the state kind of frowns upon either owning or selling this stuff. They could have donated it to any museum and would have had no issue with the law whatsoever. I mean, it wasn't their fault they found it, right? But they figured that if Grandpa was from that particular organization, he could at least help with the funds for the renovations, and decided cash was better than being named in a museum leaflet. My friend was mostly insulted by the idea. That's just because he owns a medieval store and sells historic weapons. I mean, he must know a collector for this sort of stuff that would pay cash, but that was the end of it. He told them to get out and donate it, or if they insist on selling it, ship it to the US. More money from history buffs, or at least not one happy little German extremist with a new happy stabby toy. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was on the receiving end of someone selling my stolen stuff at one of these stores. We had our house burgled in the UK. Me and my dad went to some pawn shops to give them a list of everything taken. While we were in there, someone came up to the counter and started unloading a bunch of stuff they want to sell, and it was our stuff. We got into a major incident inside the shop. The jerk manager of cash converters was saying it's nothing to do with him and to take it all outside. Sorry buddy, but when you're happy to buy a camera full of someone else's family photos, a laptop, and a bunch of other electronics from two junkies who look like they're homeless, no teeth, obvious signs of substance use, among other things, then it's absolutely 100% your problem to deal with. The police were called, junkies charged with handling stolen goods, and I got charged with attacking them. That was later dropped. Nobody charged with the actual burglary, so no real punishments for anyone involved. I don't know if it's necessarily illegal, but one time a guy brought me a handful of human teeth with bloody roots and gold fillings. He wanted me to extract the gold. I said, no thanks, bro. Even as a guy who works on a channel where we read objectively bat-crap crazy stuff all the time, I have to admit this one was a bit of a shock. So do people just think that all people who work at these shops are criminal fences or something? An MP40. Not actually me, but my significant other. He manages a store owned by a national chain. He brought it in on pawn, and as with all neat things, he was just waiting for the loan to drop after the 30 days of payment before the item went out on sale. At this point, he could purchase it. Now, I'm not a huge weapon historian, but I know the era and style and had to ask, that thing is super rare if it's not full auto. When a weapon is taken in on loan, the weapon is run, not the person, so our state's Bureau of Investigation was notified of its existence. Not only is a federal stamp for automatic weapons expensive as frick, it's also difficult to obtain, so he was no longer going to purchase it. And it's a good thing, because shortly after, the gun was seized by ATF, which is when we found out the actual worth, $10,000 to $20,000. Original owner brought it back as a war trophy, and the son is the one who got a loan, for like $200, but it was never registered, so it was contraband. I don't like pawn shops. My buddy had his surfboard stolen. A few weeks later, he found his board in a pawn shop. My buddy approached the staff and said it was his and that it was stolen. The staff then told him he had to buy the board back if he wanted it. The police were called because the board was reported stolen. Upon the arrival of the police, my buddy learned he still had to buy back the board if he wanted it back and then file a claim with the state to get his money back. Why does the state cover pawn shops selling stolen goods? Really nice old-looking farmer man walks in with a shotty with a barrel way too short. Long story short, boss brought it off him and immediately called the local police department to tell them. The cop asked if you could just remove the barrel and dispose of it as it was too much paperwork and hassle to come down and get it. The local police department are a fricking joke. A TV was stolen from my dad's office and sold to a pawn shop. This had been happening with yard decorations and our neighbors told us what pawn shop to look at. Sure enough, it showed up, and at first the manager wouldn't provide any info or even care that we thought it was stolen. My dad then offered to buy it and requested that the TV be plugged in to check for defects. It worked just fine, and my dad said he'll take it, and then pulled the remote out of his pocket that the thief didn't take and turned the TV off, proving it was his. The manager then had to call and report this. Turns out accepting a TV without a remote is a red flag that he missed in this case. The manager quit, but the general belief was that he knew most of the stuff he was selling was stolen, but he fudged paperwork to keep the thief's identity a secret. My dad put him in his place and humiliated him in the most simple way for being a lying prick. My friend's dad works at a pawn shop in a crappy area and has had some crazy stuff come in, mostly stolen weapons and tools, but the story he likes to tell is when a homeless guy tried to sell a sawn-off shotty covered in tape. They called the cops and the guy tells him he found it in the park. A block away from my high school was a pawn shop. It was announced that everyone in the entire school was going to get a Chromebook to do some schoolwork. On the first day that we got the Chromebooks, it was rumored that multiple people had brought them to the pawn shop to make a quick buck. I asked my teachers who was in charge of all the Chromebook repairs about this later, and he said that only one student had actually done it that he knew of, and he used the money to buy green herb. When my first fiancée and I parted ways, I went to go sell my ring. She'd given me her ring back, so I went to pawn them because I was broke and I got so many dirty looks for selling an engagement ring. I think they thought I stole it despite what I told them, but them's the breaks, I suppose. One of the guys who worked at the place told me that someone brought in an F-box, a decent-sized box that has a switch on it that turns on a motor inside that has a connection to a toy that thrusts in and out of a hole. I saw a guy in my local store bring in about 3 automatic weapons with the ammo and about 10 grenades, ready to use. Not sure if it was illegal or not, but it made my antique Hot Wheels collection look like crap. I work in a store. Not really illegal in itself, but probably the most contact with law enforcement that I've had. I live in the UK where we have to put the serial number of any technology through a police check before paying the customer. We put it in and it flagged as wanted by the police. Within 10 minutes the police were there and asking us to hand the phone over and talk to the guy. We hadn't even gotten through to them yet on the phone. From what I understand, the guy brought it online a few months back. Unfortunately for him, the phone was wanted in connection with a murder. The look on that poor guy's face. That is a really unlucky eBay case that my dude there got himself. Don't you hate it when you try to be thrifty and end up being taken down to the station for an intense questioning and then they keep your damn phone? My house was broken into years back. They stole very particular items. My mum's laptop, which was hidden under the couch, our great-grandmother's jewelry and such. My laptop, Wacom pen tablet, and iPad were all sitting on the kitchen table, and the only thing they took was my iPad and the pen to my Wacom tablet. They left my laptop and the tablet itself. Remember these points for later. The cops couldn't find any good prints to run through the database, and no one was immediately found as a suspect. Fast forward a few months, my brother manages one of the biggest pawn shops in our city, and he called me to tell me that some guy just tried to pawn my iPad. The guy handed the iPad to my brother turned it on and the home screen is set to a picture of me and my nephew. Brother tells the guy that he has to take it to the back and check the serial numbers after getting the guy's driver's license. Brother calls the cops and then comes back out to tell the guy that he has to keep the iPad because it's stolen property. The guy books it out of there, but he wasn't very bright. My brother has all of his personal information. The cops did an investigation and come to find out this guy is the head of a large substance and theft ring. His cronies steal things and they have to give him the stolen goods, and then he gives them the substances. Well, a few more months go by and we found out that our mum's best friend's boyfriend was the guy who put the hit on our house. He had an oxy problem due to a bad back surgery and a substance-dealing doctor. When the doc cut the supply, he turned to other means. It wasn't him that broke in or stole our stuff, however. He just knew that I used my computer for my job and made sure they left my laptop and stole my mum's. He and his boss, along with multiple other addicts and career thieves, were brought down by my iPad. The cops said they'd broken into an estimated 300+ homes and had stolen millions of dollars in property. I work in one, and honestly, you just never know what's going to come through that door. Former employee. The most illegal thing brought to my shop was an 8-ball of white snow. He wasn't selling it but wanted to buy a digital scale, and he brought the ball along just to test the scales we had. Aside from that, a chainsaw. Although not illegal in itself, they used it to threaten me, which was pretty illegal. Pawn shops in a big metro get pretty crazy. I had this street rat named Tintin bring in a purse with fresh bloodstains on it. I used to work in a pawn shop that was just for tools. This guy brought in these really nice top-of-the-line wrenches to sell. He said business was booming, and I asked what he did, and he said, "You really want to know?" In a scared kind of way. I was like, "Yeah, I'm just making small talk," and he said he was a substance dealer. So I said I don't want the wrenches, they were probably stolen. I used to work in an electronics or DVDs games secondhand store, and we used to get people in all the time selling what were blatantly mass-run bootlegs. Hundreds of copies of the same DVD, which under even rudimentary inspection didn't come off a proper print run. Heck, if you popped one in a player, it usually just cut right into the movie a few seconds in or something like that. That and people who had just stolen crap from a first-hand retailer nearby and were busy tearing the packaging off in the damn queue for the registers. One of my friends in high school somehow managed to steal several laptops from cash converters. Got away with it too. That was until they tried to sell one of the laptops they stole back to cash converters the very next week. with the CC sticker and barcode still on the bottom. He was quickly caught and they found his whole stash, and he did 100 hours of community service. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.